Living in New York City was eating away at their funds. Now, paying for his second year at City College was uncertain. When they moved from their small town to the big city, Gary thought he had a good plan. His mother had paid for his first year of classes as a graduation gift. He also had a part-time job ready in the apartment they rented. What he didn't fully realize was how high the costs were here. Emma's job as a trainer at a gym in Manhattan helped add some extra money, but it wasn't enough. It barely covered her share of food and subway fares. They found ways to save money. They got rid of their apartment's cable TV, phone, and internet service. They kept their cell plans, but used them less and accessed free Wi-Fi when possible. For fun, they took long walks to explore their new city. They exercised at home and ran together to stay fit. In reality, this was mostly for Gary's benefit since Emma's job kept her in great shape. Gary, who worked in bookkeeping, spent many hours sitting, so he appreciated the exercise. It was much better than the tough chores he used to do on the family farm. Speaking of family, he stayed in touch with his mother through email, sharing details about his new life. She was getting the hang of social media, and he enjoyed watching her farm videos, even if he was one of just a few viewers. It was nice to see her daily life on the farm. As for the rest of his family, they treated him as if he was a total stranger. That made him a bit sad, but he hadn't been very close to them before. In contrast, Emma kept in touch with her entire family through email. He smiled at this fact because it matched her friendly and cheerful nature. Everyone seemed to be drawn to her. With her bright blue eyes and a sprinkling of freckles on her nose, he could spend hours watching her express different emotions. She also had a fit body from staying active, and her long red hair was usually tied back in a ponytail. He was in love, and anyone who spent time with her usually felt the same way. This made Gary a bit anxious since they spent many hours apart, and she worked with some very attractive men. He had visited her workplace just once. That was enough to make him feel that he was better off not thinking about how he looked compared to them. He was fit and had a nice build, but he wasn't as muscular as they were. He knew Emma loved him, but a small voice in his head kept whispering that he wasn't good enough for her and that she deserved someone better. He found it hard to deal with that feeling and tried to hide his worries from her. He closed his laptop and looked across the small table into her blue eyes. She stuck out her lower lip in a playful way, making him smile with her lovely expression. Her smile brightened when he laughed. "So it isn't as bad as it looks?" she asked, hopefully. He gave her a teasing grin. "We're not about to be kicked out of our home, so that's a good sign." She laughed at that as Gary sank back into his chair. He was trying to think of another way to make some extra money. He had a part-time bookkeeping job he set up before moving to the city, and that was decent. He also did bookkeeping for a few local businesses, but they paid small amounts. Keeping track of all these clients, along with his classes, left him with very little free time. That time was precious to him because he wanted to spend it with Emma. He was protective of that time, but if he didn't find a way to save more for his second year of college, his plans might fall apart. His smile faded. Emma glanced at the clock and then smiled. "We still have time to visit Rocky's before they start." This lifted Gary's spirits as he looked at the lovely girl across the table. She knew exactly what would help him relax. "Yeah, let's go." Gary went into the bedroom and returned with his guitar case. The old guitar they had found in the apartment when they moved in was now his favorite possession. Its wonderful sound amazed him, and he enjoyed playing it so much. Thursday nights were open mic nights at their local bar, Rocky's. Even though they weren't old enough to drink there, they were welcome to join in the fun. The bar was owned by a friendly older man named Rocky, who had a gray buzz cut and seemed to know everyone in the neighborhood. He had heard good things about the responsible young man who was doing bookkeeping work for some locals. They left their apartment, locked the door, and walked down the stairs to the street, enjoying the warm spring air of the May evening. When they arrived at the bar, Rocky was there and greeted Gary with a handshake. He nodded to them and signaled for one of his helpers to set up a small table next to the stage with one chair for Emma. When they had first come to the bar, Gary wanted to find a way to overcome his fear of performing. Playing for a small group of regulars at the local bar seemed like a good place to start. During open mic night, performers could use their own instruments or, if they were singers, there was a karaoke machine. After Rocky heard Gary play, he invited Gary to accompany singers who preferred not to use the machine. Most singers liked having Gary play while they sang. In return, Emma got to sit next to the stage, and they both received complimentary soft drinks. Since they weren't big fans of sweet drinks, they usually opted for plain water, which Rocky appreciated. Tonight, as Gary walked up to the stage, he noticed the bar was more crowded than usual. Only a few tables were left empty. He glanced at Rocky and saw the large smile on his face, clearly happy with the crowd enjoying their drinks. Gary took a seat beside the stage and felt all those eyes on him. A chill ran down his back. Then his gaze met Emma's as she looked back at the crowd. He could see she recognized his nerves, but she gave him a warm smile that made him feel better. Taking a deep breath, he returned her smile and silently said, "I love you." Her smile grew and warmth filled him up. She whispered back that she loved him too, which gave him courage. He opened his guitar case and quietly tuned his instrument. He knew Rocky liked him to warm up the audience with his music before others came on stage. He had been practicing a song and felt ready to perform it tonight. He moved the mic stand closer to his guitar and looked at Rocky. Rocky nodded and walked up the stairs to face the crowd. The noise decreased as people looked up at the man in the dark suit. "Welcome to Rocky's open mic night. It looks like a fantastic crowd tonight, so I hope you're ready to get on stage and share your talent." The audience laughed at his playful demeanor. Rocky pointed to a man who laughed a bit too loud. "Hey, by talent I mean skills." He paused for the laughter. "Singing and playing, you know what I mean?" Finally, Rocky smiled, and the audience responded with smiles of their own. "To kick off our evening, Gary Truman will play a couple of songs for you. Let's give him a round of applause." Rocky stepped off the stage, and all eyes shifted to Gary with his guitar. Taking a calming breath, Gary adjusted the microphone closer to his mouth. He looked out at the audience, but focused on no one in particular. "Good evening. I'm going to play Asturias by Isaac Albanese." "Thank you." He lowered the microphone back to his guitar. Looking into Emma's loving eyes brought him peace again. He closed his eyes, cleared his mind, and began to play. All that existed was the guitar, his hands, and the music. Before the bar's manager took the stage, a tall blonde man walked in and quickly spotted the one he hoped to see playing his guitar. He scanned the busy tables and caught the eye of two men sitting at separate tables nearby. Both nodded at him, and he returned the gesture before stepping outside to make a call. Gary finished his flamenco piece to loud applause. He noticed Emma had tears of joy on her cheeks and a big smile on her face, which told him she loved it. He smiled back at her and nodded to the audience. "My next song is a familiar one, and you know the words, so feel free to sing along." The bright and cheerful notes of "Here Comes the Sun" by the Beatles spread smiles all around. Many audience members planned to sing on stage tonight, making this a light moment where they could join in without the pressure of performing alone. As Gary got lost in the music, he frequently looked up to see the audience enjoying themselves. The blend of voices was wonderful, and he nodded back at them with admiration before finishing the song. The applause now felt shared, and he clapped for the audience too. Rocky stepped onto the stage and moved to the mic while clapping. "Thanks, Gary, always amazing. We're ready for our next performer, who is..." He glanced at the paper in his hand. "Tracy Mulholland. Just a reminder for performers, you can use the karaoke machine or ask Gary for music. Enjoy." After he left the stage, a slender blonde woman with big curly hair approached Gary. She pointed to the machine and he nodded in response. The light faded on Gary and he relaxed. He shared a smile with Emma, and they turned to listen to Tracy sing. When Tracy started her show tune, Gary felt like he was bracing for a storm, but at least she was singing well. Not every act tonight would be. An hour passed, and Gary played for most of the singers who came to the stage, which he found enjoyable. Two singers played their own guitars, allowing him to sit back and appreciate their performances. One of them impressed Gary. He was taking a moment to rest with a sip of ice water when the tall, blonde man approached him again. "Excuse me," the man said. "Do you know any songs by Selena Moreno?" Gary nodded. "There's one I feel comfortable playing for an audience. My Soul, Your Sanctuary. It's one of her original hits with a beautiful intro." He noticed the man was smiling and nodding along. "Are you going to sing?" The man smiled and looked relaxed but shook his head. My girlfriend is next, and she'd love to sing one of those songs. The one you mentioned would be just right, thanks. Gary looked past the man at his girlfriend, but her face was mostly covered by her hoodie. She seemed shy, but ready to get on stage. Good for her, he thought. He nodded to the boyfriend, but the man was already turning to talk to her, then headed to a table in the middle of the club. The woman went to the stairs and climbed up to stand in front of the microphone. She looked at Gary and nodded. He took a few deep breaths to calm himself and then began to play the introduction. The audience stirred a bit as they recognized the powerful ballad, but it was new to them how it was played. Gary lost himself in the song, playing it in his own way, a little slower and with more feeling. His eyes were closed as he navigated through the beautiful melody. He didn't notice that the woman was watching him or see her nod to her cheerful boyfriend. She moved to the microphone and started to sing, matching the mood of Gary's guitar, and everyone went quiet. Gary kept playing as her voice blended perfectly with his guitar. It was enchanting. Emma sat at her table, amazed to realize the singer was Selena Moreno. Looking around, she saw she was the only one close enough to see under the hood. The audience was captivated by how talented the woman was. Watching Gary, she saw how deeply he connected to his music, and it always gave her a warm feeling inside. Thinking about how they spent time together after he performed made her smile. She was excited to get him back to their apartment. As the song came to a beautiful close, Gary opened his eyes and smiled down at Emma, but she was focused on the woman. He noticed the audience was cheering loudly. He turned and saw that the hood had fallen back. Selena Moreno stood there, a lovely woman with a warm olive complexion. Her long, dark hair was tucked inside her sweater. She was tall and slender, her hands adorned with rings. Those hands were pressed together like she was thankful, and she beamed a dazzling smile at him. Her lovely hazel eyes sparkled with delight. He grinned, realizing how familiar she was with the music and how naturally she sang along. She was a true professional. He smiled and nodded to her. Gary usually didn't get starstruck because he thought it was silly to place celebrities on pedestals, but he felt honored to share the stage with someone as gifted as her. Rocky quickly climbed the stairs to stand beside Selena and lean toward the microphone. Thank you for a wonderful evening. Tonight's open mic night has come to an end. Thank you. Gary and Emma joined Selena, her boyfriend and keyboardist Greg, and her manager Stefano at a table in the back. Selena's security made sure they were not bothered by excited fans, but the crowd behaved well. Emma smiled at Gary when Rocky took a picture with Selena for his bar. What are you drinking? Greg asked the young couple. Water, Gary and Rocky replied together, laughing a little. Gary explained, We're not 21 yet. Selena looked at Gary in surprise. How old are you? He smiled back at her. 19. We're 19. You play like that and you're only 19? Your music has so much feeling. Most people don't reach that level until they are much older, Selena exclaimed. Emma smiled at her. Gary is an old soul in a young man's body. Hey, he protested, but she hugged him, and her affection made him smile again. Selena shook her head in disbelief. Greg has been visiting open mic nights at many clubs looking for new talent for our band. He heard you play before and came back to see if you would be here. He called me when he saw you on stage and I hurried over. Stefano leaned in. You definitely have talent, and you would be a great fit for Selena's voice. I think you'd make an excellent lead guitarist for her band. Emma's eyes widened in excitement. Gary felt a bit nervous with the quick turn in the conversation. I just play for fun. It helps me relax. I'm not really interested in playing professionally. This small venue is about all I aim for. I appreciate the offer, but I have to say no. Stefano stared at Gary in surprise. It's a shame to keep such talent hidden. He looked at Emma. Talk some sense into your boyfriend. Gary turned to Emma. Marlene thought I was wasting my talent too. Emma's smile faded a bit as she remembered the pressure Marlene put on him. She took Gary's hand. The music is his, and he will decide what to do with it. I am proud of his ambition to be an accountant, and I know he will excel at that. He is already getting a lot of experience and helping with audits for several local businesses. Stefano huffed in frustration and seemed ready to leave. Selena looked disappointed but took one of Stefano's cards and wrote her phone number on the back. She handed it to Gary. This is my personal number. If you ever change your mind, and I hope you do, please call me. She gave him a final appreciative smile. Thank you for tonight. Gary smiled and nodded back. She gathered Greg and her security team and they left. Rocky turned to look at Gary in surprise. That's a chance walking right out the door, the man at the bar said, nodding toward the exit. Gary looked at him and gave a small smile. Do you wish I'd used my music to make a career? He asked Emma softly. Emma shook her head, smiling back. No, you have to stay true to what feels right. If music isn't your path, then don't force it. She touched his cheek lightly. I'm tired, though. Let's head home. Gary grinned, picked up his guitar case, and offered her his arm. I'll catch up in a moment. I need to talk to Stefano, Greg said to Selena, who nodded and slipped into the back of the limo, looking a bit tired. Greg walked over to Stefano. Did you get the recording? Stefano smiled and pointed to the two audio technicians, who nodded as they adjusted the recording gear on their shoulders. They had captured everything clearly. She really needs this. Keep me updated, Greg said before he hurried back to the limo. Greg would do anything to make Selena happy. Back at home, Gary placed his guitar case in the corner and thought about the night. Playing for Selena had been a thrill. She was on another level, more talented than anyone he'd played alongside before. He felt proud of himself for performing so well, especially in such a busy club. There had to be at least 60 people there, far more than the usual crowd. For a brief second, he imagined performing with her on a grand stage, maybe in a stadium in front of thousands. Just the thought made his nerves flare. He shook off the thought and took a deep breath as Emma walked up quietly behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. Oh, didn't mean to startle you, she said, noticing his reaction. He turned to reassure her. No, it's all right. Just lost in thought. Emma chuckled softly and hugged him tighter. Gary. Emma's voice pulled him back to the moment, her hand reaching out to bring him closer. They shared a warm, lingering embrace, feeling the closeness between them in a comforting silence. They lay together, each feeling the contentment of simply being with the other, grateful for the simple joys they could share. Gary wrapped his arm around her, and they lay side by side, enjoying the peaceful quiet of their home. Moments like these made them feel deeply connected, and it brought a sense of calm to them both. After a while, they settled into the comfortable rhythm of being close, sharing quiet words and laughter until they both drifted to sleep, relaxed and happy. The next morning, Gary felt ready for a new day. College life at the city college was a lot different from high school, in ways he hadn't expected. He would have to pay for his classes next year without help, and things didn't look good for him to have enough money. He really didn't like the idea of taking out a loan because he didn't want to start his life with debt. He had seen his parents struggle with money on the farm, and it was a tough subject for him. It had been a little over a week since he met Selena Moreno, and things had returned to normal for him. He missed the last open mic night because one of his clients needed help with their accounts after their accountant made a mistake. It was Friday afternoon after their last class, so Gary was in the cafeteria where his study group gathered before going their separate ways. Everyone was there. Brock Thielsen, Lee Chang, Jasmine Goldman, and Gary. Brock was tall, slim, and handsome, always dressed well. He was the first openly gay guy Gary had hung out with. Gary was learning to stay calm when Brock said surprising things. He started to think Brock enjoyed joking around with him. Lee was slim and cute, but she was very competitive, even if she often apologized for it. She liked to blame her mom for her shy behavior. She also liked to hear Brock's adventurous stories, and he was always happy to tell them, especially when Gary was nearby. Jasmine was lively, clever, and friendly, but maybe too playful. She had pretty eyes and a strong nose. She was the shortest of the group, just over 5 feet, but she had a curvy figure. She often leaned against Gary, who was taller and leaner. Jasmine knew Gary had a crush on Emma, but she couldn't help but tease him because he was the only straight guy in their group. She said it was all in good fun. Gary wasn't so sure about that. They were discussing the quiz they had just taken, and Gary felt good about his answers. Jasmine was upset about some mistakes she made and playfully hit Gary's arm before leaning against him when she found out he did well. Gary was about to tell her to sit up when he suddenly froze. The people at the next table were listening to the radio a bit loud, and what was playing caught his attention. Jasmine looked at him in surprise when he didn't push her away. She noticed his surprised face and where he was looking. Brock was about to say something, but Jasmine shook her head and started to listen too. Lee glanced at the table next to them and saw two women listening carefully with big smiles. Lee didn't really know what good or bad music was, so to her it was just noise. She was about to ask them to turn it off when Jasmine touched her arm and pointed at Gary's face. As the last sounds faded, the DJ spoke up again. That was Selena Moreno's latest song, a new acoustic version of her hit My Soul, Your Sanctuary. The identity of the talented guitar player with her is still a secret, but wow, can he play? Rumor has it this recording was made in a small bar somewhere in the city. Jasmine looked at Gary, whose face shifted from disbelief to annoyance. Then she had a realization. "Oh my God, that was you playing!" she exclaimed loudly, remembering he had said he played guitar for fun. The two women at the next table turned to look at them. Gary snapped out of his shock and frowned. The women immediately lost interest in what was happening at Gary's table. He turned to Jasmine. "Can you please lower your voice?" he asked firmly. "It was," Jasmine said, though her voice was still louder than Gary wanted. "Yes, that was me, but I didn't agree to this recording or letting it be played on the radio," he said. "You should consider taking action and get paid for it," Lee suggested. Brock nodded with a smile. "I agree with Lee. It looks like you have a case if you didn't sign anything." Gary shook his head. "I didn't sign anything. It was an open mic night. Selena came in without anyone knowing who she was, and I played one of her songs. I didn't find out it was her until afterwards. I didn't see anyone recording, and they didn't tell me they had." He felt frustrated. "I'm disappointed. I thought Selena would handle things better than this." "Ooh, look at Gary. He's on a first-name basis with famous stars," Jasmine joked. When she saw him frown, she changed her tone. "But seriously, you should think about it. You could earn some money and you could use it." Her blunt comment about his money troubles didn't make him feel good, even though it was true. "The only ones who win in lawsuits are the lawyers, whether they win or lose. I prefer to stay out of that," he replied. He picked up his books and put them in his backpack. It was time for his after-school bookkeeping job. The others stood up too. "Take action until they pay," Lee said, then walked away. Brock chuckled as he watched her leave. "I still think she has a point." He waved goodbye as he left. Jasmine looked up at Gary with concern. "I'm sorry your famous friend let you down like this." She pulled him into a hug, and for a moment he felt comforted by the warmth. He missed her happy smile as she rushed off, waving goodbye. Gary pushed those feelings aside. He had work to do and money to make, the honest way. At the fitness club, Emma's boss, Dennis, watched her lead a class from the back of the room. He started making funny faces at her, and she fought to keep from laughing into her microphone. After the class ended, Emma guided everyone through the cool-down steps and let them leave the room. As she reached the door, she saw Dennis waiting for her outside. She playfully tapped his strong arm for distracting her during class. He chuckled as she shook her hand, which felt a bit sore. Dennis took her hand and checked it with a smile, then he gently kissed it, making her blush as she pulled it back. She shook her finger at him but smiled. "You shouldn't be flirting with me since I'm seeing Gary." Dennis just shrugged with a grin. "I can't help it if my heart thinks it's right." Emma shook her head, trying to hide her smile, as she stepped into the main area filled with exercise equipment and people finishing their workouts. A song started playing, and Emma gasped. "What's wrong?" Dennis asked. Emma listened to the music, her expression showing her surprise. Dennis noticed her reaction, so he paused to listen too. "That guitarist is amazing." "It's Gary," she replied quietly. When Selena's voice filled the air, Dennis looked at her in shock. "When did your boyfriend start performing professionally?" "He didn't. The recording is a bootleg." They listened for a bit more, and Dennis caught her eye again. "Gary should make a career out of this." Emma shook her head as she walked away with a worried look. She didn't see Dennis's disappointed expression as she left. She needed to talk to Gary. When Gary got home from his part-time job, he carried a bag with their dinner, a small, pre-cooked chicken and salad. Emma sat at their small kitchen table and they ate quietly, both deep in thought. She noticed Gary's troubled expression. "Did you hear that Selena Moreno released a recording of the song we played at Rocky's last week?" he finally asked. "Yes, it sounded surprisingly good for a bootleg, but I was shocked to hear it at all." she replied, watching him closely. He nodded and then looked into her eyes. What do you think I should do? Should I call Selena and ask her to take it down? Emma shook her head quickly, and when he looked at her curiously, she explained. It's like art. Once it's out there, you can't just put it back. Gary smiled and chuckled lightly. A genie? She nodded, her ponytail bouncing. He held her gaze. I think you're a genie. She grinned playfully, folding her arms and blinking at him. Of course, master. Gary looked at her earnestly, and she began to giggle. Gary reached for her, and she quickly got up and ran toward the bedroom. She wasn't in a rush. Emma felt a warm, happy feeling inside her after they had shared a special moment. Gary's guitar playing from a song started to play in her mind, and she smiled at how beautiful it was. She hoped Gary wouldn't ask her to turn off the music. Suddenly, Gary's stomach made a loud noise, showing he was hungry again. Their exciting time together had probably made him work up an appetite. Emma smiled at that thought. They didn't have any food in the fridge since they needed to do grocery shopping. That was a task for Saturday, which was tomorrow. Dennis had mentioned that Gary could play professionally before. Emma knew that Gary wasn't ready to perform in front of a huge crowd, but he had recorded a song. Do you think Selena would pay you for the song you recorded at Rocky's? It could help us and fill your empty stomach, Emma said playfully. He laughed and hugged her, but didn't respond. Emma chose not to press him further. The music was his passion. Gary stared at the ceiling, feeling a wave of doubt come over him. He began to worry that Emma might have changed her mind about his music. He felt ashamed about how tight their finances were. Maybe it was time to call Selena. Selena was thrilled and feeling more alive than she had in years, but she was also angry and embarrassed by her manager's actions. She was annoyed for not getting Gary's number earlier. The wonderful night she had at that small club and her manager's sneaky move had pushed her back into the spotlight. But now she felt stuck. She walked around her living room, considering going to every door near Rocky's to find Gary. When her phone rang, she jumped. She quickly answered, Hello? Hi, am I speaking to Selena Moreno? Gary's voice came through. Oh my gosh, Gary, thank you for calling. I'm so sorry I didn't ask for your number to explain what happened. Yeah, I was surprised when I heard the song on the radio. I didn't expect that, he said somewhat awkwardly. I didn't know about the recording until I heard it on the radio, too. My manager did it without telling me. I'm really sorry they put you in that position, but I can't say I'm sorry everyone got to hear it. Your guitar made the song something special. It's even better than the original. Gary seemed taken back by her praise. That's really nice of you to say. I'm not just being nice. It's my song, but with you playing, I felt emotions that the original didn't capture. You made that happen. There has been a big increase in interest in my music, but the new version feels so different from what I'm used to. I really need your help, she said. Gary paused for a moment before responding. I love music. I taught myself how to play, and it's my happy place. It's where I go to escape from the stress of life. People say I should make money from it, but if I do, it might lose what makes it special for me. I've always struggled with stage fright, so I usually play for Emma and some friends. I've been going to Rocky's open mic night to help with my nerves. Usually there are only a few regulars, so the night we met was a different experience for me. I managed because Emma was there, and I closed my eyes to focus on the music. The thought of performing in front of larger crowds makes me very anxious. I'm sorry, I just can't do it. Selena thought hard about how to convince him to play with her again, and then she had an idea. She needed to learn his new sound, and she could do that without going on stage. If they could play together, maybe even make an album, she could pick up his style and give her music a fresh feel. Gary, would you be open to making a studio album with me? She asked. He seemed surprised. Really? What does that involve? He replied. We would get together and play some music, we could try out songs and write new ones, then we can go to a studio and record them. This would help me capture the feelings your music brings out in me, Selena explained, hopeful. Gary took a moment to think. Atu could probably do that. There won't be a lot of strangers, right? Selena did a little happy dance. No, just a small group of close friends. All right, that sounds good, he said, feeling more sure. She twirled around the living room. Could you and Emma come to my place for dinner tonight? Greg and Stefano will be there to discuss the contract. I really need their help. Then we could do some recording on Sunday. I actually work on Sunday afternoons to review the accounts for some local businesses, and I've been doing some auditing. If you ever need an accountant, I'm your guy, Gary joked. I might think about it if you promise to keep playing music with me, she teased back. Gary laughed. Just tell me when and where, and I'll see you tonight. She made him write down the address, and they hung up. Selena couldn't contain her excitement. She bounced on the couch, feeling so hopeful for the first time in years. New music with deeper emotions was on the way. She quickly called Stefano. Mancini, he answered. Stefano, Gary called. He was frustrated about the illegal activity, but he said he would be open to making an album with me. That's amazing, the man exclaimed. I'm glad he changed his mind. We're meeting at my place at 7. Please bring a contract for Gary tonight. She decided to have a little fun with Stefano. And bring a contract for hiring Gary as an accountant, too. What? Stefano shouted. He's 19! How could he even have any certification? Stefano, I was just joking. He's such a responsible young man. He said he couldn't record on Sunday because he was busy working as a bookkeeper and doing audits. Come on, it was just a joke. It wasn't very funny, and it hurt my feelings. Our relationship should be built on respect and trust. I'm sorry, Stefano. Will you be there? Yes, I'll be there with a musician's contract. Bye. Selena frowned at the phone. She felt a growing sense of doubt. This was the second time Stefano had reacted strongly to her mentioning an audit. Maybe she should ask Gary privately what an audit would really involve. Gary looked at his cell phone, wondering where this unexpected change in his plans would lead him. He was worried about risking his happiness for money, but he needed to do something to protect his future and support Emma in the best way. He heard the front door open, and Emma's cheerful voice as she chatted with a neighbor. Emma made friends wherever she went. He smiled as she closed the door and turned to him. Making new friends? He asked. No, it was Sam and Raphael. I saw them again in the laundry room this morning. They are such a cute couple. He's tall, dark, and handsome in a mysterious way, and she's blonde and bright like sunshine. They are very different but perfect for each other. They're both in school. She's training to be a hospital administrator, and he's going to be a surgeon. Gary looked at her with interest. I haven't met them yet. If you hadn't slept in this morning, you could have come with me to do the laundry, and you would have met them, Emma said with an amused look. Sorry about that, he said apologetically, and she leaned in for a kiss as a way of making up. He smiled, then glanced at his phone as worries crept back into his mind. He pushed them away again. I'm bringing us new friends, too. Really? Who? She asked with excitement. Selena Moreno and Greg Yasmin. We've been invited to dinner at their place tonight. I've agreed to work on an album with her. Her manager is bringing a contract. Emma dropped the laundry bag and stared at him. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. But what about performing on stage? She mentioned that making a studio album is more like jamming with other musicians without an audience. Then they record it. No big crowds, so it feels more relaxed, I think. That's great, she cheered. He nodded. It should cover a year of my college tuition, I think. Maybe 2. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked carefully. He looked at her and thought she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She was kind and caring, and he wanted to do everything for her. He just needed to make sure that this didn't affect his love for music. Yes. Emma quickly jumped onto his lap and filled his face with kisses. When she pulled back, she smiled brightly. I'm so happy for you. It must feel great to know you might be able to pay for your course with this. He waved his hands. We haven't talked about payment yet, and I haven't seen the contract. It's all just an idea for now. On a practical note, we really need to get groceries. Ugh, she groaned. This wasn't her favorite task, but it had to be done. Just a few blocks from their home was a decent grocery store. When they first arrived in the city, they shopped at smaller stores nearby. But as their budget got tighter, they had to go further to find better prices and more items. Emma pushed the cart while Gary searched for the things on their list. They had their favorite foods and tried to eat well, but they had to be smart with their limited money. As they turned a corner, Gary heard a familiar voice. Oh my God, rock stars buy their own groceries? They're just like us regular folks. Gary looked up from his list to see Jasmine and Brock smiling at him. He noticed Emma's curious look. These are my classmates, Jasmine Goldman and Brock Thielsen. This is Emma. Jasmine stepped closer and shook Emma's hand. Nice to finally meet you. Gary talks about you all the time. Nice to meet you too, Brock added with a smile as he shook her hand. What are you guys doing here? Gary asked. Don't you live near one of these stores? He waved at the building. Brock pretended to be shocked. How do you know such private details about Jasmine's neighborhood? He gasped again. Oh no! The secret has been revealed by such a simple clue. Jasmine laughed, and Gary rolled his eyes at them. Come on, Brock. Last week we looked at Google Maps to compare commutes. I saw the grocery store on the map. Seriously, what are you doing here? I like Brock's story better, Jasmine teased, winking at Gary. She blew him a kiss and danced down the next aisle. Gary watched them walk away with his arms crossed. Then he turned to Emma, who was watching him closely. Do you have a crush on Jasmine? She asked. A little less today, he replied, frowning. Do you think she's pretty? Emma asked, trying to hide a grin. Gary snorted and looked at her in surprise. Just then, Emma's phone rang, and she pulled it from her pocket. Gary caught a glimpse of a picture of Dennis, and his eyebrows shot up. Emma's confident smile faded as she looked embarrassed. The photo showed Dennis without a shirt, and his strong muscles were shiny with sweat. He was flexing his arm and smiling at the camera. Hello? She said, noticing Gary's raised eyebrow. She shook her head while listening. Gary saw her face change to shock. That's terrible, he thought, feeling a mix of worry and curiosity about what had happened at the gym. Today? Emma replied, then quickly glanced at Gary. Can you hold on for a moment? She said to Dennis, placing the phone against her chest. Yvonne, our main trainer, got into an accident and was hurt. Dennis needs someone to cover her classes. There's one this afternoon and 2 tonight. These classes are very popular, so they pay well. Dennis wants to offer them to me. Emma looked at Gary, and he could tell this was important to her. Still, he couldn't help but speak up. Saturday is our day. When her smile began to fade, he held her hand. No, I'm just being silly. You should take it. You deserve this. We'll find another time for us. Emma's smile returned, and her eyes shimmered. She nodded and brought the phone back to her ear. I'll do it. Her smile grew as she listened to Dennis, making Gary feel a flash of jealousy towards the fit guy who could bring such joy to Emma. He quickly pushed those feelings away, knowing Emma didn't deserve that from him. See you soon, Emma said before hanging up. She glanced at the time on her phone. I'm really sorry, Gary. I need to go now if I'm going to make the class. I won't be home until around 10. He forced a smile. It's a clever plan to escape grocery shopping. She laughed and kissed him, which made him feel a bit better. Then she rushed off, leaving him with a pang in his heart. Taking a deep breath, he got behind the shopping cart and checked his list again. He steered down the next aisle and moved forward. Grocery day doesn't wait for anyone. Halfway down the aisle, he paused. Selena and Greg were having dinner together. He would have to go without Emma. He took a deep breath and tried to shake off the gloomy feeling. After going through 2 more aisles, he spotted Jasmine looking at herbal teas. There was no sign of Brock. Hey, he said, and she nodded, then looked around for Emma. She got a call from her boss. It's a great chance she couldn't turn down. Gary realized he was rambling, so he stopped and checked his list. They didn't need tea. Where's Brock? Jasmine smirked. He met someone cute and they went off for lunch or something. Gary waved his hand, not wanting to know more, then continued on his way, battling his gloomy mood. Jasmine walked alongside him. Are you okay, Gary? She asked softly. Oh? Yeah, he said casually. He picked up his last item and headed to the checkout. She joined him, carrying a small basket with some tea and a bottle of jam. Their eyes met. Okay, I was actually following some celebrities today. I was bored and thought it would be fun to spend time with you and Emma. Brock came along because he loves to tease you. She noticed how much Gary was buying. It seems like you could use some help with that. He sighed. Yeah, that would actually be helpful. After paying for his groceries, he placed them into his reusable bags, which had comfy handles. They walked the few blocks back to his apartment, chatting about their assignments for next week. Gary wasn't too worried since he was already doing some of the steps for local businesses. Jasmine was curious and wanted to know his secrets. All I can do is help you in our study groups. You need to learn this on your own or it won't stick, If I see you struggling, I'll guide you back on track," he said. "Why are you taking this course if you already know this stuff?" she asked. He chuckled. "Hey, I'm learning too. Besides, I need this course for my certification. After that, I can ask for a better salary for the work I'm doing since I'm not being paid much right now." Once they were in his apartment, Jasmine took a seat at the small kitchen table while Gary put away the groceries. "So, Brock is having another casual fling?" Gary asked. Jasmine laughed. "Oh my God, you sound like a grandpa saying that." Gary remembered Emma calling him an old man in a young man's body and smiled. "I'm trying to be open-minded. I just don't understand why he changes partners so often." Jasmine shook her head, still smiling at him. "It's just fun. Brock is just enjoying himself. He's young, so he has time to find someone special." Gary shrugged. "Would you like me to make you a salad with grilled chicken?" Jasmine beamed at him. "That would be lovely." He moved around the kitchen and prepared 2 salads with chicken, and they shared the meal at the table. "I only have water to drink." "That's fine," she said. "This is nice." They enjoyed their meal and talked about Lee's latest outburst regarding her mother. Lee was starting to seem like a Disney villain to them. "So, what's next for Gary the music star?" Jasmine teased. Gary chuckled softly before recalling his news. "Well, I'm going to Selena Moreno's place tonight for dinner and to discuss recording an album." Jasmine's fork fell into her bowl as she looked at Gary in shock. "Oh my God, that's amazing! Are you going to tour with her? How will you manage that along with your course? Are you leaving your accounting job now that you're becoming a guitar star?" Jasmine asked with excitement. Gary laughed and raised his hands. "Whoa, hold on. I'm not going on tour. I'm finishing my classes because I want to be an accountant. I don't feel like a guitar star at all. I'm still learning and I teach myself." "But you could end up on a big stage someday, right?" she pressed. "No way. I get really nervous on stage. That's why I'm only making a studio album, no audience," he explained. She thought for a moment while finishing her lunch. "But don't you play at the local club?" Gary nodded. "There are usually only about a dozen people there, and they are all regulars. The night I played with Selena, the place was packed. If it wasn't for Emma, I would have been so nervous." Jasmine shifted a little. "I've never heard you play." Gary gathered their plates and cleaned up, then turned to her with a smile. "I could play something for you." She beamed and clapped her hands. "Sit on the couch, and I'll be right back." He went into the bedroom to get his guitar from the case. When he returned to the living room, he saw Jasmine sitting on one end of the couch, facing the window. He took a seat at the other end and turned to face her. "You have a really nice place. It's warm and cozy with a lot of light," she said with a content sigh. Gary smiled. "We love it here. It's not big, but it's easy to clean, and our neighbors are mostly students who are not too loud. Emma knows all of them." He tuned his guitar softly, then looked up at her eager expression. "I recently learned this piece and played it at Rocky's the night I met Selena. Flamenco guitar is challenging but very rewarding. It has really helped me with other styles, too." Feeling a bit shy for getting too excited, he glanced at her. She was just smiling. "Anyway, this is Asturias by Isaac Albeniz." He closed his eyes and took a deep breath before starting. This piece needed his full focus, but he let the music come naturally. When he finished, he leaned back and opened his eyes to see tears in Jasmine's eyes. "Hey, what's with the tears?" he asked, concerned, grabbing a tissue for her. She wiped her eyes but smiled at him. "I'm sorry, it was the most beautiful music." "I think you need some happy tunes," Gary said with a playful look. He started playing the William Tell Overture finale in a funny and wild way. Jasmine laughed at his silly speed, but knew he was just being funny while playing great music. He pretended to be out of breath at the loud part and smiled at her as she clapped. "That was so good. You're a little crazy, though." Gary quickly pulled up the jingle for Almond Joy candy. "Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't." To be honest, his singing could use some work. "Okay, I can tell from your face I should stick to playing," he said with a sigh. "You know the saying, you have a face for radio? Maybe you have the voice for silent movies," Jasmine joked. "Ouch," he said, pretending to be hurt. "Oh, come on, you play guitar so well you can do great things even without fancy singing." "That makes me feel better," he said, smiling. He played Here Comes the Sun, and Jasmine sang along pretty well. "Your singing is way better than mine," he said as he set his guitar down to rest his fingers. "Thank you, kind sir," she replied with a slight bow. "I was supposed to go to Selena's tonight with Emma, but she'll be working late. Want to come instead? I'll just check with Selena first. You're not one of those fans who follow celebrities everywhere, right?" Jasmine tried to hide her happiness and teased Gary playfully. "Hold on a second." Gary called Selena again. She answered on the third ring. "Hi, what? Yes, I'm still coming, but Emma can't make it. Is it okay if I bring a friend from college? Great, see you at 7, thanks." Gary looked over at Jasmine. "You're in." Jasmine jumped across the couch with a joyful squeal and hugged Gary. He was surprised, but her happy energy felt nice. He gently let go and saw her smiling brightly, which made him blush. He noticed her excitement was showing a bit, and he quickly looked away, feeling his face warm up. They spent the next hour sharing stories about their families. Jasmine loved hearing about his farm experiences and asked to see his mom's vlog. "Oh my goodness, that sounds so sweet. I need to subscribe," Jasmine said as she quickly found the channel on her phone to hit like and subscribe. "Awesome. Mom now has 3 subscribers," Gary said a bit awkwardly. "You're not embarrassed by your mom, are you, Gary?" Jasmine asked with big eyes. "No. I think she's one of the most amazing women I know. It's just that her vlog is pretty simple, and the things she shares are things I already know, so it's not very exciting for me. I wonder how others see it. The internet can be a tough place. I don't want anyone to be mean to my mom," Gary said, feeling protective. Jasmine nodded. "I understand. It can be a harsh place, but many women like your mom are trying new things and sharing their stories. My grandmother, or Bubby, is one of them. She has an account with cooking videos. She's learned a lot and even got my mother to make videos about sewing. I'll share your mom's account with them. They can give her helpful advice, but what she shares is lovely and real, which is hard to find online." "Thank you, I think she'd appreciate that. I'll send her a quick message to let her know she might hear from some new friends." Gary quickly typed an email to his mom, telling her she has a new follower and might get messages from others who enjoy what she does. Gary shared that his mother was the only family member he still connected with. "My dad stopped caring about me when I said I wouldn't do what he did. He got really angry and made things hard for me during my last year at home. Mom helped me stay sane. My siblings didn't want to talk to me." Jasmine gave him a sympathetic look. "Did you ever play guitar for them?" He thought for a moment and realized he never had. "No, I was too busy trying to leave and escape my dad. I didn't think much about them. When I left, I gave my truck to my younger brother, Dale. He's going to be a farmer like Dad. Sarah and Heather are younger than Dale, but I don't know what they want to do." "It's never too late to reach out and just say hi," Jasmine encouraged. He looked at her and agreed. "What about your family? Do you all get along?" She laughed. "Not really. I have 3 sisters and 4 brothers. The funny part is, we are all way too involved in each other's lives. We can be really clingy." Gary tried not to laugh, but nodded, finding her stories amusing. Talking with Jasmine felt easy and comfortable, just like chatting with a friend. They had plenty of time to talk. Emma walked to the front of the class, feeling excited to see all the smiling faces looking at her. It was time to begin. "Hello, everyone. My name's Emma, and I'll be your captain today. Yvonne had an accident and is recovering. I don't know much, but we're all hoping for her swift recovery. In the meantime, I'm familiar with your routine," she said, pausing to give them a big smile. "But I'm going to add a little more energy to make you all smile and feel great." That sparked excitement among the group. "Let's get organized. It's time to get moving." She showed them her biggest smile, and their energy rose again. Emma began the class with a slow and soulful song by Gary and Selena. She guided them through deep stretches, noticing smiles on everyone's faces. As the song neared its end and the tempo picked up, she encouraged them with kind words. She gradually increased the energy until they were all moving energetically together. Emma filled them with her enthusiasm, and they clearly loved it, asking for more. 45 minutes later, she ended the session with Selena's new song and helped everyone relax. "Thank you for your energy. You were fantastic." The group cheered for her, and she responded with a big smile and a bow. As the class wrapped up, a client approached her, grinning widely. "You brought so much energy to our session. That was amazing. You really led the class well." Emma smiled back with gratitude. "Thank you. I hope Dennis offers you as good a contract as Yvonne managed for me. I'm Nancy Delaney, a partner at Kirkman, Douglas, and Delaney. I handle contracts. If this temporary role seems like it might become permanent, please call me." Emma was surprised when Nancy handed her a business card. It was waterproof. Nancy smiled. "It's protected so it stays nice, just like me." Emma giggled and nodded. As Nancy's friends called her over, she smiled at Emma one last time and waved goodbye. Emma packed her things into her small duffel bag, tucking the business card into the side pocket. When she left the studio after the group, she bumped into Dennis, who was full of excitement. "I knew you could do it. I watched, and you did a fantastic job in there. I got amazing feedback from the clients as they left. They said your energy made a big difference, and they enjoyed the session even more than with Yvonne. They want me to keep you." Emma's smile grew wider, and he picked her up and twirled her around. She felt a rush of happiness as he set her down, trying to hold back her laughter. After waving goodbye, she headed to the showers. She put her first outfit into her laundry bag in her locker. After a quick shower, her mind wandered back to thoughts of Dennis. With a small sigh, she shook off her confusion, dried off, and dressed in her second set of workout clothes. She made sure she had her third set in her bag, glancing at the business card and smiling to herself. This was just a temporary position. Once Yvonne felt better, she planned to return to her classes. As she started her rounds around the area, she noticed more clients smiling at her. Emma recognized some from the earlier session. They praised her in front of the other clients, and news about her was spreading. Dennis was also around, grinning and giving her high fives as they passed each other. His playful spirit made her laugh. When it was time for her next session, she greeted the group and saw their excitement. They must have heard good things about her previous class. Feeling their positive energy, she was eager to share it back with them. "Let's get started. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for the meal and the wine," Gary said, smiling at his host. "I won't say a word if you don't," Selena replied with a smile. Gary enjoyed sipping one glass during dinner to socialize. It was nice, but he preferred water, which he also drank. Jasmine had 2 glasses, but seemed perfectly fine. She was as lively as always. Selena and Greg were great hosts, keeping the conversation away from work topics during dinner. They chatted about travel, family, and city life, listening closely when Gary or Jasmine spoke. Jasmine was certainly the more talkative one. While enjoying a light dessert, Selena glanced at Gary, her eyes sparkling. "I really liked our session at Rocky's. The new version of My Soul, Your Sanctuary was inspiring and got a lot of interest. I'm thinking about putting out an album of my other popular tracks in the same style. What's your opinion?" Gary was surprised. "You want my opinion?" Selena smiled. "Yes, what you did for My Soul, Your Sanctuary was beautiful. I hope you might help update 10 to 12 of my favorite songs." He thought for a moment and nodded. "That could work, but wouldn't it be better to add a couple of new songs to attract more attention?" Greg smiled. "Now you're thinking like a businessman. Have you done this before?" Gary laughed, but shook his head. "I'm completely new to this." Greg turned to Selena, who was deep in thought. "What do you think, honey? Any great songs in your mind?" "I have some lyrics I wrote last year that I can't find the right sound for," she replied softly, looking at Gary. He watched her until a smile lit up Selena's face. She dashed upstairs and soon returned with her journal. "This is my favorite," she announced, and read the words as they listened closely. Greg jumped up, went into the next room, and came back with a portable keyboard and stand. He set it up next to his chair. "This is what I thought of," Greg said as he played a few notes, but Selena shook her head. She turned to Gary. "What do you think?" He looked at her awkwardly. "If I had known we were doing this, I would have brought my guitar." "You do have something, right?" Selena asked excitedly. Greg hurried out of the room again. Gary nodded slowly. "But first, how do you want it to sound?" Selena smiled. "I see it as a sweet but sad song about lost love." Gary smiled back and agreed that was more like what he was thinking. Greg's earlier version was a bit too gloomy. Greg returned, looking apologetic. We don't have any usable acoustic guitars, but I do have a nice electric one. Can you play this? I played one once and it went well, Gary said. Greg smiled and handed him the guitar. As Gary adjusted the strap and got used to the instrument, Greg came back with a practice amp and plugged it in. He connected the guitar to the amp, turned the guitar's volume to the max, then turned on the amp and increased its volume before giving Gary a nod. When Gary plucked a string, he was startled by the loud sound. Isn't that too loud for your neighbors? Selena smiled. We had the place soundproofed before we moved in. The noise that gets through isn't too much, and most of our neighbors are older with less hearing. Gary nodded and practiced a little with his favorite flamenco piece, trying to get a feel for the instrument. The sound is a bit bright. Can we make it warmer? Greg was looking at Selena with excitement and quickly nodded to Gary. Sure. He adjusted the amp, and Gary smiled as the new tone came through. Yeah, that's much better, thanks, he said, giving a nod to Greg. He turned to Selena. This is what your lyrics made me think of. He started softly with a hopeful sound, drawing his audience in. The notes became gently sad, but still carried a sense of hope. When he reached the chorus, the mood shifted as he felt the ache from Selena's lyrics about loss. Yes! Gary stopped playing at Selena's excited shout. He looked at her worried, but she was beaming. She suddenly took his head between her hands and kissed him. Before he could react, she jumped into Greg's arms, laughing. Gary blinked in confusion as Greg looked back at him, equally surprised. Still in Greg's arms, Selena turned to Gary. That's the sound I've been looking for! It's perfect! Oh, okay, Gary mumbled. He noticed Jasmine staring at him in amazement and sighed, rolling his eyes. Selena got down from Greg's arms. Get the recorder! Once again, Greg dashed into the next room. He came back with a cart full of electronic equipment. The cart was plugged into the wall, and then Greg unplugged a cord from the practice amplifier and connected it to a panel on the cart. He ran another cable from the cart back to the amp. Next, he plugged in the keyboard and then he handed Selena a microphone. Gary watched all of this with interest, but he was unsure about some of the cables. He met Selena's gaze as she turned around with the mic. Are we going to start the studio album now? He asked nervously. I haven't signed anything yet. Greg smiled at him. There's that business sense again. It's great to see someone creative think like that. Hey, Selena said playfully, pretending to be hurt. Sorry, Selena, but you know business isn't your strength, Greg joked. He turned back to Gary while Selena pouted. This isn't for the studio. When we practice, we record everything to catch ideas we might forget. We can listen back and decide what parts we want to use for our studio recordings. This device will capture everything we play and allows Selena's lovely voice to be recorded separately. Gary nodded, smiling. That made sense to him. Can we try playing that again, what you were doing? Selena asked Gary with hope in her eyes. He smiled back at her. As long as you don't surprise me out of the song again. She smiled playfully and Greg started the recording, giving her a nod. She held the mic close. Saturday the 15th, Selena, Greg, and special guest Gary Truman. Audience of one, Jasmine Goldman. Recording untitled song 376. Not the most romantic title, Gary joked. I'll think of a better name later. Now go ahead, Gary, she said. He smiled and settled into the music again, playing as he closed his eyes and lost himself in the melody. He didn't see Selena and Greg share a grin, or Jasmine smile at them. Greg began to play along as Gary finished the intro, and Selena's voice joined in as she held her journal to see the lyrics. When she reached the chorus, Selena's voice caught slightly at the sound of Gary's guitar, which seemed to express sadness. She managed to keep singing through it and continued to the next verse. After repeating the chorus, Gary felt inspired, and the notes from his guitar grew strong, like his heart was full of emotion. Greg tried to follow along, but the guitar took the lead in the bridge. As the music faded, Selena returned with a happy tune, and Gary wrapped it up gently. Jasmine was amazed. She had just seen a song come together from start to finish in just 2 moments. She realized this was possible only because Gary felt his music deeply. They had been in school together for months, and Gary had never shown strong feelings before. Today, Jasmine spent the whole day with him and decided he was the calmest and coolest guy she had ever met. He could be funny and love to laugh, but nothing seemed to stir him up enough to show strong emotions. Gary was the opposite of everyone in her family. At times, She thought he might not really feel anything at all. But then this happened. As she watched him play, it was clear he felt his music deeply. His emotions were strong and vibrant, and he shared them effortlessly through his guitar. She held back tears, moved by what she heard. If only he wasn't so in love with Emma. Selena noticed Greg reaching over to turn off the recording. He checked the file and smiled, confirming it was great. Gary blinked as he came out of the music and smiled at Selena. "Was that okay?" Selena burst into joyful laughter and hurried over to hug Gary. It was a little awkward with the guitar between them, but Gary smiled happily. "So, you liked it?" "Gary, it was beautiful," she exclaimed. Then she looked over at Jasmine. "Don't you think so?" Jasmine struggled to clear her throat and quickly nodded. "She's speechless. That's a big win for her. I'm honored," Gary joked. Jasmine finally spoke up. "I was going to say nice things about your playing, but now I'm not so sure," she said playfully, though her voice trembled a bit. Selena and Greg laughed. "That's a sure hit," Greg said, pointing to the recorder. Suddenly, there was a thump at the front door, and Greg quickly jumped up. When he came back, Stefano was with him. Gary could tell Stefano felt uneasy and wondered if it was because of him. "You have to hear this," Selena exclaimed, and Greg played the song for Stefano. Gary noticed a difference between this recording and what he heard on the radio, but it was still very good. Selena's smile was huge. "What do you think?" Stefano looked impressed as he stared at the recorder, then glanced at Gary before turning to Selena. "I've never heard that one before. Didn't you say you'd be redoing your old hits?" "It's new. I sang the song once for Gary, then we recorded it in one go," she said excitedly. "Wow!" Stefano said quietly and looked at Gary again. Gary could tell that Stefano was uneasy around him. It was probably because of the bootleg he had made. "I need to leave, but I brought the contract for Gary to sign," Stefano said. "I'd like you to explain it to me since this is my first musician's contract. I have some questions," Gary smiled. "I don't have the time tonight," Stefano replied. Greg frowned at him. "Did you not hear the amazing music we just played? We have something special here." Stefano shoved the contract into Greg's hands. "You explain it to him and get the signature. I have things to do. I'll be back for this in the morning." Everyone watched as Stefano hurried out the front door. Greg followed him and locked it. When he turned back, he noticed Selena looked upset. "What's wrong with that guy?" Selena complained. "Did I say something wrong?" Gary asked, confused. "I'll talk to him in the morning," Greg said, placing the contract on the coffee table. He knew how to make Selena feel better. "What classic songs do you think would work best with Gary's style?" Selena's mood switched to happy as she flipped through her journal. Greg shared a smile with Gary. They agreed. There was nothing better than making someone you care about happy. Emma was tired, but also thrilled. Her last class had been the best of the three, and everyone cheered when it ended. Behind the glass in the back of the room, other clients had paused their own workouts to watch her energetic session, after so many people were smiling that her cheeks hurt from grinning. Her body was pretty worn out, too. She had put a lot of energy into her routines, or rather Yvonne's routines, but she had added her own twist. The clients loved it and wanted more. Her skin tingled with leftover excitement. She was also very hungry and hoped Gary didn't have trouble finishing the grocery shopping after she left. She stepped out of the shower and dried off. She put on her clothes for going home and packed her laundry bag into her gym bag. She would need to wash these for her next classes. She was excited to do it all again. As she walked toward the locker room door, she suddenly stopped. Selena Moreno! She was supposed to see her with Gary tonight. She had been so caught up in herself that she completely forgot. She felt terrible. She called Gary's phone, but it went to voicemail, which probably meant he had gone without her and didn't want to interrupt his friends. "Sorry, Gary. I just remembered that I was meant to visit Selena Moreno's house with you. I hope you went and had a great time. I'll see you at home. I love you." Emma didn't really enjoy leaving messages. They always felt a bit empty. She stepped out of the changing room and walked toward the exit. There was Dennis, waiting for her with his cheerful smile. He wore a dark jacket and a white shirt with gray pants and black shoes. His big muscles made him look a bit scary, but his happy smile showed he was friendly. Emma's cheeks hurt a little as she smiled back. "What are you still doing here?" she asked. Normally he left before the last session since he came in so early. "Who could leave without seeing that amazing show? Everyone was cheering for you at the end," he said enthusiastically. Emma laughed. "You're being silly. They were not." "Okay, but they were cheering loudly. I haven't seen that since the early days when Yvonne and I opened the club." "What happened to her?" Emma asked, feeling her stomach rumble. Dennis looked at her. "How about I treat you to dinner before you get too hungry, and I'll tell you?" "You don't have to do that," Emma replied. "You really helped us out today, so please let me thank you with a meal. It's the least I can do." Emma thought about going home to her empty apartment and cooking for herself. A free meal would save some money, so she nodded. He motioned for her to lead the way, and they walked together on the sidewalk. "There's a nice restaurant at the Hilton just down the street. They have a great Caesar salad with grilled chicken." That was what she and Gary had planned for lunch, so Emma felt happy to nod along. They quickly reached the hotel and went up to the restaurant on the second floor, finding a cozy table by the window where they could watch people walking by. Dennis ordered 2 glasses of sparkling juice. Emma protested a bit, but he said they should celebrate because he had exciting news. Curious, she stayed quiet as the drinks arrived. "I had so many clients come up to me saying how much they loved your energy and kindness. You really made an impression. I'm thinking about featuring you in an advertisement," Dennis said seriously. Emma was shocked. This was a big deal. Advertising was usually very expensive, and Dennis was offering it to her for free. This could really help her career. He raised his glass, and she did the same. The drink was quite nice, even though she didn't have much experience with it. Her family had never been big on drinking. "This could really take your career to the next level," he added, agreeing with her thoughts. They toasted again, and then she ordered dinner. Dennis felt the same way. Dennis asked her many questions about growing up on a farm and living in a small town. She found another glass of wine and made more toasts. They talked until the place closed, and by then she felt lightheaded from the 3 glasses of wine he had gotten for her. They shared a taxi back to her home. "I'm really proud of you and grateful for your help today," he said as the cab stopped at her front door. "Thank you for believing in me. I really appreciate it and can't wait for classes tomorrow," she replied. "I'll see you there," he said with a big smile and leaned in to hug her. She sighed a little, feeling his arms around her, and he gave her a quick kiss on the cheek before opening the door. She stepped out, slightly unsteady, her gym bag over her shoulder as she glanced back. He pointed to the door, showing he was waiting for her to get inside safely. She struggled with her keys and suddenly felt someone behind her. She turned and saw a tall, dark man waiting for her to open the door. "Hey, back off!" Dennis said, quickly stepping out of the cab. The man turned to Dennis, meeting his gaze. "I live here." Emma's memory clicked. "Raphael, I'm sorry, my mind isn't all there right now." She looked at Dennis, who had paused on the sidewalk. "It's okay, Dennis. Raphael is my neighbor. I'll see you tomorrow." Dennis got back in the cab, giving Raphael one last look before leaving. "Do you have your keys?" Raphael asked Emma. "Yes, but I guess I'm a little tipsy. I couldn't find them," she replied. Raphael used his key to let them inside. She needed his help to get up the stairs, too. "You seem more than tipsy," he said as he helped her to her door. Emma looked up at Raphael, noticing again his charming features. Sam was a lucky girl. Mouth. Something about her mouth. Wait, did Dennis kiss her? Sam heard Raphael's voice and opened her door. Upon seeing Emma leaning against the wall, she hurried over with a worried look. "I don't drink, but we were celebrating tonight," Emma explained with a smile. "You and Gary?" Sam asked, looking past them. "I don't think so, unless Gary is a tough guy," Raphael said to Sam. Emma was shocked. "Dennis isn't like that." Raphael looked into her slightly glazed eyes. "You told him you don't drink, but he insisted." "To celebrate my good fortune," Emma replied softly. He looked at Sam. "When I was waiting behind Emma, this guy called me names and told me to back off." Emma shook her head. "He was just being protective." She blinked. "He called you what?" Raphael sighed, feeling frustrated. He had little patience for people who had drunk too much these days. He recognized a rude person when he saw one. "I'm tired and hungry. Good night." He walked past and entered their apartment, glancing back at Sam one last time. The pretty blonde took Emma's hand. "Where's Gary?" "He's having dinner with Selena Moreno. I was supposed to go with him, but I got a work chance." Sam stared at Emma. She chose work over dinner with a famous singer? "What chance?" "I got to lead the biggest classes during the best times. More money, and it went so well that Dennis is thinking about promoting me. This is big for my job," Emma said with a smile, which faded quickly. "But Dennis didn't tell me about Yvonne," she said, sounding upset. "Who's Yvonne?" Emma looked at her. "She's the one whose classes I covered. Dennis mentioned something about Yvonne being in an accident." She frowned. "I must sound terrible calling this a chance. It's sad for her, but someone needs to lead the classes. It seems like it will help your career." "Good for you," Sam said, watching Emma's smile return, but it wavered. Time to change the subject. "How does Gary know Selena Moreno?" Sam asked carefully. Emma nodded, grinning. "Did you hear her new song on the radio?" "My Soul, Your Sanctuary. Yes, it's such a great version," Sam exclaimed. Emma's smile grew bigger. That was Gary playing guitar. Sam's mouth dropped open. "Oh my gosh, he's really talented. I thought he was going to be an accountant." Emma nodded. "He is. Music helps him relax. But Selena wants to make a studio album with him." A big yawn escaped her as she leaned against the wall. Clearly, question time was over. "Let's get you inside before you fall asleep," Sam suggested, using Emma's keys to unlock the door. Once Emma was in, Sam placed the keys on the table by the door. "Emma, please lock up after me." Emma turned and nodded, so Sam stepped into the hallway and closed the door. When she heard the lock click, she relaxed and entered her own apartment, locking the door behind her. She turned to see Raphael in the kitchen, enjoying the sandwich she had made for him. He smiled at her. "Thank you for dinner," he said with a sigh. "You could take a dinner with you," she suggested. Raphael shook his head. "Too many risks at work." Working at the meatpacking plant wasn't the safest job, but Raphael was used to hard work and understood the risks better than most. After he finished his sandwich, Sam walked over and hugged him. It gave her a thrill. "Did you hear that Selena Moreno song on the radio?" she asked. "Is that the one with the mystery guitarist? I heard the others talking about it at work," he replied. "It's Gary." Raphael pulled back a little to meet her gaze. "What, the guitarist? That's our neighbor?" Sam smiled and nodded. "Selena Moreno wants to record an album with him. They are having dinner together tonight. Emma was supposed to join them, but she had to work." Raphael hugged his friend tightly, thinking about this situation. He usually stayed out of other people's problems, but he felt Gary might want to know that the man was giving Selena drinks. He was surprised Gary hadn't tried to take a chance with her. "You're a bit tight. You're squeezing me," Sam said. "Oh, I'm sorry," he replied, letting her go. Sam grinned mischievously. "I guess you'll have to make up for it." Raphael chuckled softly. Then he picked her up and carried her to the bedroom. He understood what she wanted. Emma stood in the quiet apartment and felt a little sad. She also felt bad about celebrating her success at the cost of someone else's troubles. She was feeling guilty about enjoying a hug from Dennis and that kiss. It was nothing special, really. Just a simple congratulatory kiss between friends. But he shouldn't have done it. She knew that if she had been sober, she would have stopped him. Emma remembered how Raphael didn't like Dennis giving her drinks. She winced, realizing he was right. She should have said no. She could have toasted with water instead. Looking at the clock, she noticed how late it was. Gary wasn't home, but he was probably having fun with Selena and Greg. More guilt hit her. She should have been there for him. But if she had, she would have missed her big opportunity at work. Besides, Gary knew she needed to go. He told her it was okay. Feeling confused and tired, she made her way to the couch to wait for Gary. But as she sat down, the room spun around her. When it stopped, she took a deep breath and smelled something. Perfume. Emma didn't wear perfume. Had Gary brought someone back to their apartment, Jasmine? That woman had been eyeing Gary at the grocery store. She probably helped him carry the groceries home, something Emma should have done. She stood up, her thoughts racing, and the waves of guilt and doubt weren't making her feel any better. Time to go to bed. Alone. Gary woke up on a couch, feeling something soft resting on him. He stretched, thinking it was Emma. but when he touched her, he realized she felt different. Suddenly awake, he looked down to see Jasmine smiling at him. Can I get up, please?" he said softly, noticing Selena and Greg sleeping on the opposite couch. She slowly moved away, clearly enjoying the moment. As Gary stood up, he bumped into the coffee table, rattling some glasses. There were wine glasses for Selena, Greg, and Jasmine, and just a regular glass of water for him. He looked at the wall clock and felt relieved. He still had time to go home and take a shower before visiting clients for bookkeeping. "Sorry, good morning, I have to go. I didn't mean to stay over," he said, a little embarrassed. Selena stretched and smiled at him. "Last night was fantastic. I haven't felt this inspired in years." She turned to Greg. "How many songs did we finish?" Greg was still waking up and looked tired. 8, no, 9, I think," he said with a yawn. "Not counting the new one?" Selena asked cheerfully. Greg nodded. "Right, not that one." He yawned again. Selena's smile was bright. "When can we meet to work on the studio album?" Gary looked at his busy week ahead. He had client visits today, and since this was exam week, they'd have to wait until the weekend. Then he remembered that Saturday was not free anymore because Emma had new shifts. I guess Saturday is free now. We have exams this week, so it'll have to wait until then," he said, glancing at Jasmine, who nodded, knowing to focus on their work. She turned to Selena and said, "Thank you for a wonderful evening. Watching the creative process was inspiring. I can't wait to hear the finished album." Jasmine smiled, and Selena beamed back. Gary and Jasmine put on their jackets, said their goodbyes, and stepped out into the early morning light. As they walked, Gary noticed the pleased smile on Jasmine's face and wondered what was going on. "I'm sorry about sleeping on the couch," he said. "I'm not. I had a great night, especially how I woke up," she replied with a smile. "Jasmine, I'm with Emma," he said firmly, and she just nodded playfully. They said goodbye at the subway, and Gary went home. When he entered the apartment, he saw Emma sitting at the kitchen table with an empty laundry bag by her feet. He hung up his jacket and approached her. "Good morning. Sorry about last night. Selena was so excited about making music that we lost track of time and fell asleep at her place." He felt a bit guilty for spending the night on the couch. Emma stood up and looked a little tired. "Hey, are you okay?" As he got closer, Emma pulled back, noticing the scent of Jasmine's perfume on him. Her expression changed. "Why do you smell like perfume? Why does our couch?" Gary stepped back, surprised by her tone. "Jasmine helped me carry groceries home yesterday since I had too much. We had lunch and talked for a while. I invited her to join me at Selena's because I didn't want to go alone. I'm sorry about the perfume. You know I don't like the smell either." "Why didn't you come home last night?" Emma still looked upset. Gary shook his head. Hadn't he just told her? He looked closely at Emma. "We played music until after 2 in the morning and everyone fell asleep in the living room. Most of them were drinking wine." He noticed Emma wince and wondered why. He was about to ask when her phone rang on the kitchen table. They looked down to see Dennis appearing on the screen. Emma picked it up, her face red with embarrassment, and answered, "Good morning, Dennis." She listened for a moment, then glanced at Gary. "Yes, I can be there. Thank you so much. See you then." She hung up and turned to Gary. "What was that?" he asked. "I did really well in my new classes. It was such a success that Dennis is going to do an ad campaign featuring me." "That's amazing. I'm so proud of you," he said, but felt a bit jealous that another man was involved. He pushed that feeling aside. He leaned in to kiss her, but Emma put a hand on his chest and the other over her nose. "Oh, right. Sorry about the perfume. I'll go take a shower." She smiled at him. "Would you like to join me?" "I can't. I need to do laundry before heading out to meet Dennis at the photo studio," she replied awkwardly. He nodded as she headed for the door. When the door closed, Gary sighed and walked to the bathroom. He really wanted to change out of these clothes. They reminded him of Jasmine and how nice it felt to relax together. Gary felt his face heat up. Maybe the shower would help clear his mind. Dennis stood in the photographer's outer office as the man set up the studio. He had used his friend Dino's services before, but the billboard near the gym and signs in busy spots would cost a good amount. Everything needed to go well. The main focus of this ad was Emma. She represented the youth and health his gym wanted to promote. The challenge was that he also needed her charm, and she was quite reserved. Emma was beautiful, and her smile was captivating. Everyone at the gym said they felt welcome by her friendly nature. The workout clothes she wore were fitted but not too revealing. Dennis picked up the outfits for their shoot, which would add some energy to the photos. His job was to help Emma feel comfortable. Since he was already wearing his, she should too. "Okay, all set. All we need now is the girl," Dino said with a smile at his friend. Dennis nodded. "The pictures should show youth and happiness. We want them to look lively, but we'll avoid any suggestive themes to keep Emma comfortable. She can be a bit strict at times." "Yeah, I understand. We'll keep it classy and healthy," Dino said, glancing at the front door. "Where is she? I have a swimwear shoot to do after this one. Time is money." Dennis raised his hands to calm Dino just as the front door opened. Emma hurried in, slightly out of breath from running. "Okay, I'll be in the studio. The changing rooms are in the hall to the back. Let's go." Dennis smiled at Emma, and she smiled back. She noticed his new fitness outfit. "That's a new look for you," she said, trying to hide her surprise. "It's for the shoot," he replied, glancing down at himself. "I have an outfit for you, too." Emma's eyes widened. "What? Is there something wrong with what I'm wearing?" she asked with uncertainty. "Not at all! It's for the campaign. We are promoting youth, health, and energy. We might be changing the colors soon. This is all part of the plan. It looks good, right?" Dennis said with a cheerful grin. Emma couldn't help but smile back at him. He looked excited. "Fine," she said with a sigh. Dennis handed her the bag with her new outfit. "I'll meet you in the studio. Don't take too long. We only have Dino for an hour." As they went toward the back, Dennis pointed to the changing room and continued on his way. He felt her watching him as he walked. Emma stood in the changing room looking at the outfit with doubt. The top seemed very revealing, and the bottoms looked too small. She frowned but changed into the fitness wear. Looking at herself in the mirror, she realized she looked good, but she felt uncomfortable showing that much skin. Pushing her worries aside, she walked down the hall into the studio. It was bright and professional, which made her feel a bit better, though it was also chilly. She wrapped her arms around herself to keep warm. Dennis stood on the set, smiling and waving her over, and she walked to stand beside him. With her fists on her hips, she looked at Dennis confidently. The camera flashed, surprising her. She blinked. "Hold on, I'm not ready, and I can't wear this. It's too revealing, and I don't feel comfortable. I want my own outfit." Before Dennis could say anything, she turned and walked away. She needed to stand up for herself, and that's what she was going to do. Dennis watched her walk away, admiring how great she looked in her new outfit. Just then, Dino signaled for him to come over quickly. Dennis went to find out what was going on. "What's up?" "I can't believe it, but I got an amazing shot of her in one try. The only issue is her expression. She looks too serious. If you can make her smile, I can put her smiling face on this body, and you'll have a great ad for the billboard," Dino said. "You can do that?" Dennis asked, and the photographer nodded. "That would be amazing. How soon can you have the billboard ready?" Dino smiled. "I know someone who can finish it by the end of the week." "Perfect," Dennis replied. When Emma came back to the studio, she looked much more at ease. "Let's have some fun with this," Dennis said, adjusting his pose to match one Emma had done earlier. She jumped next to him and copied the pose. The lights flashed, and Dennis showed off several silly bodybuilder poses while Emma giggled and tried to keep up. Dino snapped away, capturing their joy. "Calm down a bit, clown. Let's get some genuine smiles now," Dino called, and they relaxed into more natural poses. The flash caught their playful moments until the photographer announced to stop. Dino approached Emma with 2 clipboards in hand. He passed one to Dennis. "That was great. Emma, with your smile, you could really shine. If you ever want to try modeling, just let me know." He handed her the clipboard. Emma smiled and looked at the form. Dino pointed to it. "This is a model release form. Just take it with you when you change and leave the signed copy at the front desk when you leave." She nodded and walked away to put on her warmer clothes. Once they were alone, Dennis turned to Dino. "So?" The photographer shook his head in amazement. "Honestly, she's just too picture-perfect. I think the second photo of her will match the first just right. She was a bit too cheerful in the others, though, you goof." Dennis chuckled and shrugged. "But you got a great shot." Dino nodded. "Good. Start on it as soon as you can. If possible, I need that billboard up by the end of the week. The bus stop ads can go up the week after. He checked the time. I need to change now. You need to get her out of here before my next group arrives. They can be a handful. Darn it, Dennis muttered as he hurried away. Emma shivered again as she zipped up her sweater. That studio was so cold. She put her outfit back into her gym bag and noticed the light gym clothes Dennis had lent her. She stuffed those in too, planning to return them later. Picking up the clipboard, she discovered the pen was out of ink, so she wandered out to the front area. Dennis wasn't there yet. She set down the clipboard and searched for another pen, but there were none around. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a text from her mom. She had wanted to call her, but they were trying to save money on their bills. She told her friend she would call later with some news. Dennis hurried into the office, smiling at Emma. Do you have lunch plans? Emma knew Gary would be at his part-time job, and she didn't want to be alone in their apartment. No, I'm free. Dennis took her arm and quickly led her outside. When she looked at him strangely, he explained, Sorry, I know a great lunch spot, but it gets busy, especially on weekends. He hailed a cab and took them to a nice area with small shops and charming restaurants. They found a table for two by a window overlooking the busy shopping street. When he offered her wine, she declined. No, thank you. I had some last night and it didn't sit well with me. I'll just have water with lemon, please. As she sipped her water, she watched stylish people dressed in fancy clothes, driving by in their nice cars or strolling through the shops. She felt a bit mesmerized by it all. Dennis observed her with a smile. What's on your mind? You're going to get used to places like this and enjoy the finer things in life just like you deserve, he said. Emma looked at him, surprised that he thought she belonged in such a crowd, so different from her simple beginnings. She noticed a graceful woman walking out of a shop with shopping bags and wondered what it would be like to have the freedom to buy things whenever she wanted. Would it make her happier than she felt with Gary? Dennis watched Emma deep in thought and felt he was making progress. He knew that getting her to think about a better life would lead to even bigger things in the future. Later that day, Gary returned home by 4, feeling good about finishing work an hour early. He climbed the stairs thinking of Emma and hoping she had a great day at the photo shoot. He felt proud of her. Grinning, he opened the door to find the apartment empty. She hadn't mentioned being out all day. He heard a noise in the hallway and quickly opened the door. Emma? 2 people, a pretty blonde woman and a tall man with dark hair, were passing by with grocery bags and stopped to look at him. The woman smiled at him. Oh, you must be Gary. I'm Sam, and this is Raphael. Hi. I was expecting Emma to be home by now, he replied. Maybe she's out with Dennis again, Raphael suggested playfully. Raphael, Sam scolded him. You mean Dennis, right? Gary asked with caution. Sam laughed lightly. Yeah, I guess she doesn't know many people who would fit that description. Noticing Raphael was captivated by Sam's smile, Gary said, Dennis is her boss, but I can see why you describe him that way. He's helping her career. Gary felt uneasy at this thought. Like getting her tipsy from wine? Raphael chimed in. Raphael, really? Sam said, surprised. Gary looked closely at the tall man. Is that what happened? She seemed off this morning. She doesn't usually drink. Raphael nodded. He took out his phone and quickly sent her a message. He noticed the couple waiting for her reply. When his phone pinged, he read the message and paused for a moment. She had 3 classes on Sunday, too. She wouldn't be home until after 10. That meant they had almost no time together on weekends. He sighed, feeling disappointed. He replied, Proud of you. Love you. See you tonight. Well? Sam asked. Oh, Emma now teaches fitness classes on Sundays, too. She won't be home until late, Gary explained. Does this mean you don't have dinner plans? Sam asked with a big smile. Raphael looked surprised. Gary noticed their exchange and tried to make an excuse. I'm okay. I'll just heat up some leftovers. Nonsense. You should have dinner with us. It's the friendly thing to do, she said with a grin and shot a look at Raphael. Please join us, he said. But Gary could tell he was only saying it to avoid Sam's disapproval. He smiled. If it's not too much trouble? Not at all, but you'll need to bring your own chair, Sam said sweetly. Gary nodded. I just got back from work, so I need to clean up. What time should I come over? How about 7? Sam suggested, and Gary agreed. See you then. Thanks, he said, watching which door Rachel went to for knocking later. Sam smiled and pointed to the door. Gary waved goodbye and went inside. After spending all day in small, musty rooms of shops, he often felt a bit off. At least he felt good about helping his clients manage their expenses, and their records were looking much better. His goal of teaching them to be independent had a downside. Some might not need him anymore, which could create problems for his income. This made him think about how he wanted to earn money with his music. He wasn't sure if it would change how he unwound after work, but he felt there was no choice. He took off his jacket and sniffed it. It smelled of various shops and a hint of Jasmine's perfume. He realized he had time to do some laundry before having dinner with his neighbors. As he emptied his pockets, he felt something stiff inside. He pulled out some folded papers and spread them flat on the kitchen table. He realized this was the document Stefan had left for him to sign. Gary frowned, feeling puzzled because he hadn't put this in his jacket. Thinking it over, he suspected Selina might have done it since she was eager for him to work with her. He remembered Stefano saying he would pick it up in the morning, and he hoped Selina didn't get into trouble. He started reading it, but it quickly became difficult to understand, so he put it in his backpack to take to school. He planned to show it to one of his teachers who knew about contracts and could give him advice on whether to sign it. Gary took a quick shower and slipped into his sweats to do the laundry. He added his jacket to the bag and headed to the basement. Laundry time, yay. Selina felt happy all day. She and Greg listened to the music recordings, and they knew they had a great album coming. This would really help her career. The songs she picked were already exciting to fans, but with Gary's special touch, it felt like a whole new album of hits. The idea of adding a new song was fantastic, but she was unsure whether to call it a greatest hits album or a collection of favorite reimagined songs with a bonus track. She smiled to herself, glad to have this happy problem. She wondered where Greg had gone. When she called for him, he didn't answer. She looked around the house and finally saw him through the glass in the small studio they had built in the basement. It wasn't big enough for the recording they would do with Gary, but it worked for her singing practice. She noticed Greg was talking on his phone. No, he seemed to be raising his voice. His face was all red, too. She frowned, not wanting to lose her happy mood, but worried for Greg. Being that angry wasn't good for him. She tried the door, but it was locked. What was going on? She knocked and then went back to the window. Greg was talking and noticed her, waving. He hung up and left the studio to join her in the hall. "Hey, you look really stressed. Are you okay? Who were you talking to?" she asked, concerned. Greg sighed and tried to shrug it off, but she wouldn't let him. He had to answer. "That was just Stefano. You know how he can be?" "What was he upset about this time?" she asked, crossing her arms. Greg rolled his eyes, but she stood firm. "Stefano was supposed to pick up the document this morning, and I've been searching for it for hours. We think Gary might have taken it." Selina looked at Greg, confused. "He's supposed to sign it. He wanted to read it first, so why shouldn't he have it until then?" "So he did take it?" Greg said, giving her a serious look. "No, I put it in his coat pocket so he wouldn't forget to take it and sign it. Why are you looking at me like that? I ask again. What's the problem with him having the paper to read and sign?" Greg pinched his eyes shut as if she had messed up. Selina felt her anger rise. She wasn't going to let Greg or Stefano talk down to her unless they explained what the issue was. "It's an important paper with Stefano's official seal. It should stay with either him or me." Selina crossed her arms. "Why?" "I already told you why," Greg snapped. "No, you told me what you wanted to happen. You didn't say why Gary can't take the paper to look over and sign. That's what we asked him to do," Selina insisted. "You know what? I'm done with this today. First, Stefano is yelling at me, and now you. Forget it, I'm going out," Greg shouted, then marched upstairs. Selina hurried after him. "You didn't answer my question," she said. He glared at her, grabbed his jacket and keys, and left the house. Selina stared at the closed door. She rushed into the living room and grabbed her phone to call Greg, but he wouldn't pick up. Then she called Stefano to get an answer, but it went straight to voicemail. He never replied to her messages, so she didn't bother leaving one. Selina plopped down on the couch, laid back, and stared at the ceiling, feeling frustrated. So much for her happy mood. Gary knocked on his neighbor's door, holding a kitchen chair in one hand and his guitar case in the other. Raphael opened the door, and his eyes widened in surprise. "You brought your guitar?" Gary felt his face get warm. "I was told not to come empty-handed, so I thought I'd bring some music." Sam appeared next to Raphael and exclaimed, "Yes!" She clapped her hands, surprising both men. She laughed at their surprised faces. "Come in, Gary. Sorry if I startled you." She pushed Raphael aside and smiled at Gary. He handed the chair to Raphael, who took it to the kitchen while Sam guided Gary into the living room. "Who told you to bring your guitar?" she asked. Gary shook his head gently. "This is my first time being invited to a neighbor's home for dinner. Emma usually helps me with these things, but she's busy, so I texted my mom. She said I should bring something like a drink or flowers. Since we don't drink or have desserts, music is what I have to offer." Sam's smile was bright, but Raphael looked a bit worried. "We're not expecting you to perform." Gary chuckled. "Good, because I can't sing well." He patted the guitar case with a grin. "Have guitar, we'll travel." Raphael's face showed a quick flash of pain and anger before he hid it away. "Please excuse me for a moment," the tall man said, then walked into the next room. Gary watched him with concern and turned to Sam. "I'm sorry if I said something wrong," Gary said sincerely. Sam shook her head. "No, Raphael will be fine. He just needs a moment." She motioned for him to sit on the couch, and they both did. "You have a lovely home," Gary said, and Sam smiled. "Emma tells us you're studying to be an accountant," Sam said to keep the conversation flowing. Raphael returned in a different shirt and joined them. "How does playing guitar with famous singers connect to accounting?" Gary laughed shyly, easing Sam's sudden look of concern. "They seem really different, don't they? I'm good with math and enjoy accounting, but music helps me relax. I had lessons at first, but we couldn't keep paying for them, so I learned on my own." "Emma said you played with Selena Moreno on her new song," Sam said, and Gary nodded. "You're that talented and self-taught?" Gary smiled. "You could say I learned by watching videos at the library. I had great teachers in my life and a strong passion for music. It really helps me unwind." "And now you're going to make money with it," Raphael said. Gary met his gaze. "It's really expensive to live here compared to the small town I grew up in. I can't afford to not try." Raphael nodded, understanding the high costs of city life. "We came from a small city too, and we noticed the price increase. Emma and I are from a farming area, and the town seems to get smaller every year. I grew up on a farm, which was a lot of hard work, and my parents faced challenges they couldn't control. We had some tough times, and I saw the stress it put on my mom. I found out I was good at math and helped her keep track of our finances. I could never be a farmer, but accounting is a solid job. Once I settle down, I plan to send money back to my mom to help," he said firmly. Gary's words seemed to resonate with Raphael, who smiled and nodded in approval. The oven timer beeped, and Sam quickly got up to check on dinner. "It's just a simple spaghetti with meat sauce." "Oh, I should have asked if you're vegan," she exclaimed. "Not vegan," Gary replied with a smile. Sam sighed in relief. "Great. Take a seat. It's ready." Raphael and Gary sat at the table while Sam served them plates of spaghetti with meat sauce. Gary smiled as he enjoyed the lovely aroma. "Would you like some water?" Sam asked, and Gary nodded. "We don't have alcohol," Raphael added. Once Sam sat down, they all began the delicious meal together. Their chat focused on living in the building, the classes they were taking, and the part-time jobs that Gary and Raphael held. Eventually, they finished eating and leaned back from the table. "That was fantastic. Thank you for the food. Can I help clean up?" Gary asked. Sam beamed and curtsied. "You are very welcome. Raphael is in charge of the cleanup, so why not relax in the living room? Would you like more water?" "Yes, please," Gary replied, handing her his glass. When she returned it full, he took it to the living room and set it down on a coaster beside the couch. Sam joined him on the couch, her face bright with a smile. "How did you meet Selena?" Gary smiled, feeling a bit shy. "I started going to Rocky's on Thursdays for the open mic nights. I just wanted to get over my shyness." "You get shy?" Sam said, surprised. Gary nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'm pretty quiet. I don't like being in the spotlight." Raphael sat down in an old armchair next to them and nodded to Gary. "Did being on stage help with that?" Sam asked. He smiled softly. "Yes and no. It took me a while to feel comfortable playing for the usual crowd. The most people I'd seen there was 18, but then one night, it was a packed birthday party. Selena's night was the busiest, with maybe 60 people. It made me nervous, but Emma helped me out. "Can you play something for us?" Sam asked, bright-eyed. Gary smiled and nodded. "I'd love to." He took his guitar from the case and made sure it was in tune. "What would you like to hear?" he asked when he was ready. "What do you know well?" Sam asked with a big smile. "I've been practicing flamenco pieces because they are challenging. Right now I'm focusing on Asturias by Isaac Albeniz." He noticed Raphael seemed a little tense. It looked like flamenco might not be his favorite style. "Or I could play something more modern." He grinned. "I know. I played this one at school and everyone seemed to enjoy it. I used an electric guitar then." He began to play Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits, and Sam clapped with joy. Even Raphael began to relax and smile. After finishing, Gary tilted his head. "Yeah, that one sounds better on the electric guitar." He looked at Sam, curious. "Any requests?" A few songs later, Raphael made a suggestion. "Gary, would you play Asturias for Sam?" Seeing Raphael looking more relaxed now, Gary replied, "Sure." He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, ready to play. He needed to completely engage with this piece because it was quite detailed, but each time he played it, it became a bit easier. Sam held her breath as the music started and slowly let it out, allowing the melodies to take her away to far-off places. She looked at Raphael, who also had his eyes closed, but he seemed more relaxed now. She smiled and let her worries drift away. When the music finished, Sam let out a soft sigh. "That was beautiful, Gary. Thank you for playing for us," she said. "It was my pleasure. Thank you for a wonderful evening. I should head home and get some rest because I have an exam tomorrow," he replied as he carefully put his guitar back in its case. Sam stared at him, surprised. "Shouldn't you have been studying tonight?" He smiled and shook his head. "I don't try to rush things the night before. I've learned that's not very helpful. I make sure to learn everything weeks in advance and review it the week before to keep it fresh in my mind." "That's smart," said Raphael. "You only say that because it's how you study," Sam teased. Gary chuckled as he looked at them both while getting up. "And with that, I wish you a good night." Raphael stood and shook Gary's hand. "You play beautifully." Gary looked into his eyes and seemed more relaxed about something. "Thank you. Don't forget your chair," Raphael reminded him, changing back to his serious self. Gary moved the chair and guitar case out the door and into his own space. He realized it wasn't time for Emma to return yet, so he put the chair and guitar case away and prepared for bed. He tried to stay awake, but he was more tired than he thought, and soon fell asleep with the lights on. He woke up hours later to find the lights off and Emma softly breathing nearby. She looked so peaceful in the gentle light from the window, and he didn't want to disturb her. There was always the morning. Chapter 6. Exam week was busy for Gary. While he felt confident about the test material, he was also busy helping his study group who relied heavily on him. He came in early to meet them for preparation and reviewed the exam with them afterward. What was troubling Gary was that he couldn't find time to be with Emma. Besides sharing their bed at night, they hadn't really been together since the week before. On Monday morning he made her breakfast, but when he found her still in bed after his shower, she sleepily said she was going in later due to her new class schedule and needed rest. So he let her sleep. Every day when he got home she was at work and would come home late. If he managed to stay awake, they were both too tired to talk for long. This routine went on all week, and he really wanted some time with Emma. He even thought about sneaking into her class. On Tuesday, Selena called him about the contract, but he had to tell her he couldn't answer until the end of the week because of his exams. She said she understood, but he could tell she was worried. When he asked if she was all right, she made excuses and asked him to let her know as soon as he could. On Thursday, he sat in the cafeteria with his study group, looking at their mood. Brock was quieter than usual, probably worried about the exam since that topic had been tough for him in their study sessions. He jumped a little when he noticed Lee staring at him with a serious look. He smiled because she was so cute even when she was plotting something. "What's on your mind?" he asked. "I was thinking about how I might lock you in a closet so you miss the exam and I get the best scores in class," she replied, still serious. Ooh, I'd help if you locked me in there too, Jasmine said playfully. No more study group for you two, Gary said with a sigh. Lee jumped up. No, you can't leave me out. Shh. Lee frowned at the group at the next table, but then sat quietly. Gary looked at the disapproving group. We're in the cafeteria, not a library. Go shush somewhere else. Then he turned to Jasmine. You need to calm down. Pooh, she said with a pout. It's time, everyone, Brock said softly. Gary nodded, packed up his things, and headed to the exam room with his group. It was time to shine. Emma came in for her shift, feeling a bit tired. She suspected Dennis had added extra sessions to Yvonne's schedule since she didn't remember the woman coming in every day anymore. Besides feeling worn out from all the classes, Emma really wanted to spend time with Gary. She still hadn't heard how his dinner with Selena went, unless he shared, which she couldn't recall because she had been too tired. The afternoon and evening classes had been going well, but she couldn't keep this up for long. Dennis had been supportive and shared light dinners with her every night. They were getting to know each other well, but she missed those long talks with Gary. She leaned back against the locker for a moment to relax before changing. She heard the door open and turned to see 3 of her co-workers come in to change as well. Carrie, Frances, and Sella were all attractive and had been there longer than she had, but none of them taught classes. She noticed they were giving her strange looks. Where did that come from? What's wrong? She asked. Carrie, the most outspoken, decided to answer first. Did you have anything to do with Yvonne missing classes? Emma jumped up in surprise. No, of course not. I would never hurt anyone, she exclaimed, her voice filled with panic. Etu was told she just had a broken leg. Dennis didn't say anything about her being seriously hurt. Frances shook her head. Someone ran over her with a car and really hurt her, she said. Oh my goodness, Emma cried in disbelief. I need to see her. Which hospital is she in? Sala no longer looked angry. Bellevue, she replied. Please tell Dennis I had to leave. He'll have to find someone else for the sessions today, Emma said as she grabbed her jacket and gym bag from her locker and hurried out. It took some time to reach the hospital and find her room, but soon Emma stood at the foot of the bed, stunned to see the cast on Yvonne's leg and the bruises on her face. Oh my goodness, Yvonne. I'm so sorry I didn't come sooner. This week has been so chaotic, she said softly as Yvonne finally looked at her. Yvonne was a beautiful black woman with striking black hair now tied back. Despite the cuts and bruises on her face, she still had a noble presence, but the accident had clearly affected her spirit. In her 30s, she had always been full of life thanks to her dedication to fitness, but now she seemed more weary. I see. You've taken my place, I hear, Yvonne said quietly, yet there was a sharpness in her tone. Dennis asked me to fill in for you until you recover. I had no idea how serious your injuries were. He mentioned just a broken leg, Emma explained. Yvonne let out a frustrated sound and looked away. Her voice turned bitter. I won't be able to do what I love again. I had a 3-year contract with Dennis as his top trainer. I knew he liked you, but I didn't expect him to go this far. Emma gasped in surprise. It was Dennis. If you can prove that, you should go to the police. Leave! I can't bear to see you, Yvonne shouted. Emma started to cry. I would never be part of something so terrible. Yvonne glanced back, seeing Emma's tears, and something softened in her expression. The anger faded, replaced by sadness. Please go. You may not have planned anything with him, but you're part of this at least. Feeling shaken, Emma wasn't sure what to do. She stood in the hallway until she could regain her composure. Then, her feet led her onto the subway, and soon she arrived at the station for Gary's college. Since he was busy studying this week, he would be in the cafeteria with his friends. She walked across the campus to the windows looking inside, and spotted Gary sitting at one of the tables with a small Chinese woman across from him. She walked into the cafeteria and noticed Jasmine sitting too close to Gary. The woman leaned in towards him. Emma felt her heart sink as she saw Gary turn to Jasmine, smiling. Those smiles should have been for her. Feeling hurt, she turned and hurried out of the cafeteria. Outside, she stood on the path to the main road and subway stop, trying to catch her breath. Her mind raced and she felt lost. Suddenly, Gary caught up to her and gently turned her to face him. He was breathing hard and looked worried. Emma, what's wrong? He asked. His eyes were full of care, and she felt a rush of emotions and hugged him tightly. "I've missed you so much," she cried. "We keep drifting apart and it scares me. Emma, I feel it too. I've missed you. I tried to find time, but school kept me busy, and you were working all the time. I felt so alone without you." They were lost in their feelings when, suddenly, a car came speeding toward them. It swerved to avoid a person in the road and slid on the smooth pavement. Jasmine was pushed aside and let out a scream as she fell. The car hit the curb and sped away while Gary and Emma scrambled to help Jasmine. She was groaning and Gary leaned close. "Jasmine, where do you hurt?" he asked, looking worried. She looked up, wincing. "The car bumped me." Emma couldn't help but laugh in relief, which made Jasmine smile a little, even though she winced again. "I'll call for help," Gary said, chuckling softly. Later, sitting at the police station with a detective, Gary held Emma's hand tightly. The detective was typing their statement when another officer handed him a piece of paper. The officer looked tired and concerned. "The security camera only caught part of the license plate. It showed the car parked there for an hour before it came toward you. It seems like this was on purpose. You were lucky to get out of the way. Your friend is okay, just a bit bruised." Gary and Emma nodded and smiled at each other. Emma suddenly remembered something. She turned to the detective. "I just spoke to Yvonne, a co-worker from the fitness club. She said someone tried to run her over just a week ago." Gary frowned. "That seems too close to be just a coincidence." The detective wrote something in the file. "The car was there for at least an hour before the incident. Do you often come to the campus? Did you tell anyone you were coming today?" Emma shook her head. "I've only come a couple of times before, and I didn't tell anyone this time." "Then maybe you weren't the target after all," Delgado said, glancing at Gary. "Do you have any rivals who might want to harm you?" Emma chuckled, and the detective looked at her. She explained, "Gary is too kind to have enemies." Gary seemed ready to argue, but then sighed and nodded. "I can't think of anyone who would want to hurt me." Emma frowned. "What if it's a fan of Selena Moreno?" The detective raised an eyebrow. "You need to explain that." "Gary plays guitar for Selena on her new live single. Maybe one of her jealous fans found out who he is," she said, and Gary looked doubtful. Delgado examined Gary closely. "That was you?" "Yeah, I played for her and ended up on the radio. I doubt someone discovered it was me and targeted me for a hit and run. We've shared this with so few people, and none of them would do something like this." The detective observed Gary and made another note in the file. "We'll check the partial license plate for a tan 80s Oldsmobile and contact you if we get any information. For now, be careful when crossing the street. The person could still be nearby," the officer advised. Gary got up and helped Emma to her feet. "Thank you, Detective." The man nodded and turned away. Gary grabbed his backpack while Emma picked up her gym bag and they left the police station. As they walked home, Gary hugged Emma, who seemed deep in thought. She smiled at him and he felt warmth in his heart. "What about Yvonne Sessions?" he asked. "Whatever you decide is fine with me. We'll find time for us." She leaned over and gave him a sweet kiss, and he smiled when she pulled back. Emma sighed. "We need the money, so I'm going to keep doing the classes unless Dennis took them away from me for not showing up today. I hope he didn't, as it's great for my career in personal fitness. But I need to tell him he has me doing too many classes. Yvonne didn't have this many. I think he's piled on more work." "It's one thing to cover for Yvonne while she heals. It's another to take advantage of me." Gary hugged her as they walked. Emma looked over at him. "I'm sorry we didn't talk about this sooner, but how was your dinner with Selena?" Gary smiled, remembering the details he had shared with her earlier this week, but she looked too tired to recall. Dinner went well, and afterward they talked about what songs to include on the album. Her agent, Stefano, left a contract for Gary to sign, but he couldn't understand it. He had an appointment tomorrow with a business law professor who offered to help him review it. If it seemed fair, he would sign it and maybe earn some money for next year's tuition. Gary looked into Emma's eyes. "If the contract isn't fair or if the professor sees anything wrong, I won't go through with it." She smiled and nodded in agreement. "Oh, I forgot to mention this earlier, but I had dinner with Sam and Raphael last Sunday night. They're a really nice couple, even if Raphael can be a bit intimidating at first," Gary said. Emma laughed. "Oh, come on. Raphael is really sweet." Gary just shook his head with a smile. Everyone seemed sweet around Emma. She had a way of warming people's hearts. When they got to their apartment, Gary's phone vibrated with a text. Emma opened the door while Gary read the message. "It's from Jasmine. She's on her way home from the hospital. She didn't break anything, but she got some bad bruises," Gary said. "Let's send her a thank you picture," Emma suggested. He smiled. "That's a great idea." He set his backpack down by the door, opened the camera on his phone, and held it up. Emma put down her gym bag, wrapped her arms around Gary, and pressed her cheek against his with a grin. Gary took the photo and looked at it. "Are you sure you want me to send this? It looks like our faces are pressed together a little too much." Emma smiled and nodded. "Yes, maybe it will encourage her to find her own partner." Gary looked at her, surprised by her playful tone. "Is that a bit possessive, I hear?" "What if it is?" Emma replied with a cute smile. Gary smiled back. "Then I get to say it too. Tell your strong boss to look elsewhere. You belong to me." She understood the hint about her contact picture for Dennis and nodded, laughing a bit as Gary inched closer and kissed her softly. As they held each other close, they fell into a rhythm of laughter and joy in their connection. After a while, they settled next to each other, enjoying the peace that followed. Gary looked at Emma, fully drawn in by her beauty. When she finally looked at him, she caught the deep warmth in his gaze. A bright smile appeared on her face, and he felt captivated again. "Stop it," she said with a playful pout. "You're making my cheeks hurt from smiling." He chuckled. "Sorry." His smile faded a bit as he grew serious. "I'm really sorry about how things got complicated. I've been worried about our money issues, but I didn't share that with you. I should have come to the club or skipped studying that morning to talk to you. I could have woken up early or met you at school to chat. We just need to work harder to share what's on our minds. I love you. That's what matters most." "I love you too," Gary replied. "Please be careful crossing the streets. I don't know who might be after us, but I can't stand the thought of you getting hurt." Emma turned to hug Gary tightly, looking into his eyes. "You be careful too." He gently held her face in his hands and kissed her softly. When the kiss ended, Emma nestled against Gary, feeling content. That's how sleep finally found them after a long week apart. Emma sat across from Gary at the breakfast table, both smiling as they thought back to the night before. Emma stretched like a cat, and Gary could almost imagine her purring. "I slept so well last night, I feel like my energy is back," she sighed. "Taking a rest day made all the difference." Gary raised an eyebrow. "Maybe our special moment is what helped you sleep so well and feel energized." Emma giggled at his playful smile. "Yes, Gary, that's definitely a better explanation." He grinned and stood up to start cleaning the breakfast dishes. Emma picked up the clothes they had left on their way to bed and put them in the laundry bag. Then she checked her gym bag to see if she wanted to change her outfits. She had 2 extras there. She pulled out a dark purple workout outfit and frowned. "I don't think I've seen you wear that," Gary said, standing by the sink. "No, you haven't. This was the outfit Dennis picked out for the photo shoot," she explained. Gary tensed up, making it clear he didn't like that Dennis had chosen revealing outfits for her. His gaze met hers, and she shook her head. "I tried it on, but I couldn't go through with the shoot in it when I got to the studio. It's too much for me. I changed into my own clothes and did the shoot with those," she said, keeping an eye on Gary. He nodded. "I wouldn't tell you what you can or can't wear, but I'm really glad you didn't use what Dennis chose. That was crossing a line." Emma didn't argue. He was already upset enough with Dennis. Instead, she stepped closer and gave him a warm hug. That seemed to help ease his worries. "I'm sorry," Gary said afterward. "I understand, Gary. I feel the same way when I see Jasmine getting close to you," she said gently. Gary sighed and nodded. "I tell her not to and remind her that I'm with you. I like her as a friend, but I don't feel that way about her." Emma's lips curled into a smile. "So you're not interested in her chest?" Gary snorted in surprise and laughed at the sweet look on Emma's face. "You're the one I think is perfect. All my feelings are for you." "That's good," Emma said happily. "I'll return these to Dennis today," she said, holding up the purple workout clothes. "Great," Gary replied, smiling. He gave her a quick kiss and then hurried off to take a shower. They had a day to begin. Gary's meeting with the business law professor was set for 10 to 10:30, so he could only spend an hour with his study group before he had to leave. Their last exam was at 11, so Gary promised to come back to the cafeteria to meet his group before heading to the exam room. Gary had heard good things about Mr. Nishimura and was excited to take his class in the next year. The professor was a small man full of energy. His classes were popular because he was as entertaining as he was skilled at teaching business law. One of Gary's accounting professors introduced them. The law professor kindly agreed to set aside some time to go over the contract. Gary showed his gratitude by being on time and thanking him when he arrived. Then the meeting took a strange turn. Haruki Nishimura was trying hard not to completely mess up Selena Moreno's song My Soul, Your Sanctuary on an electric guitar. He had some talent but lacked the skill to match his enthusiasm. "Wow, that's a lot of energy," Gary said during a break in his playing. The man's face dropped. "You don't think she'll like it?" Gary raised his hands. "It's your version of the song. There's no right or wrong. It's just not what she had in mind when she wrote it." The professor nodded as he considered that. Gary had no idea how the man learned he played the guitar on Selena's latest song or what he expected. Instead, he pushed those thoughts aside and tried to steer the meeting back on track. He had only 30 minutes with the man and hadn't expected to be caught off guard by an unexpected audition, especially with the professor's wife and daughter in the room. They were looking at Gary like he was famous. It was making him feel uneasy. "I've been asked to do a studio album with Selena Moreno." "That's so exciting," Mrs. Nishimura exclaimed as her daughter's smile grew bigger. Yes, but I have a problem. I got a contract to sign and I don't understand its wording." "I can't tell if this contract is fair," Gary said. "You have to help him," Mrs. Nishimura urged her husband. He replied in Japanese, and her voice got higher as she shouted back angrily and waved her hands towards the guitar. The professor sighed and slowly took off his guitar strap. "All right, give me the contract and I will take a quick look." He saw his wife's hopeful expression, then turned to Gary. "While I do that, play something for them." He took the contract from Gary's hand and handed him the guitar. "Oh, I guess I could play something for you." "Play My Soul, Your Sanctuary like Selena wants," the teen asked eagerly, and her mother nodded in agreement. Gary quickly checked the guitar. 3 of the strings were out of tune. "Okay, I've never played that song on an electric guitar, but I'll give it a try." The woman looked at him in confusion. He tested the sound on the strings with a short scale, and the younger girl squealed a little until her mother held her hand. He glanced at the professor, but his head was down, busy writing notes on the contract, so Gary started to play the song softly as the amp was a bit too loud for the small room, and the volume was set low. He closed his eyes and focused on the music. Playing the song on an electric guitar felt different. The instrument responded well, but he wasn't sure how to make it sound as rich as his acoustic guitar. Still, he did his best. When he played the last notes, he opened his eyes and saw the professor looking at him with a serious expression. His wife and daughter seemed excited. "You play so beautifully," Mrs. Nishimura said with a sigh. Gary smiled back. "Thank you." He looked at the professor. "Your guitar is wonderful to play, but I'm not used to electric guitars." "Your guitar?" Mrs. Nishimura asked, surprised as she turned to her husband. Then she looked back at Gary. "Haruki doesn't own a guitar. Is this not yours?" Gary felt taken aback, unsure how to respond, but he simply shook his head. All he had was honesty. He glanced at the professor, who was becoming a bit red. He hoped he hadn't made a mistake. "You don't have an electric guitar and you play for Selena Moreno?" the professor's wife asked in surprise. Gary smiled shyly. "I have an acoustic guitar. Greg Yossman lent me an electric one when I played with them at their place." He noticed the young girl looked impressed when he mentioned Greg's name. He admired the shiny black finish of the Gibson guitar, the beautiful inlays on the fingerboard, and the gold details. "It's gorgeous and plays so well." Mrs. Nishimura said something sharply to her husband, and he looked at her in surprise before responding. His wife stayed quiet, but both she and their daughter were giving him disapproving looks. Gary finally jumped in to try to ease the tension. "About the contract?" Haruki's face was serious. "Do not sign this." Gary blinked in surprise. "What?" This contract is crafted mainly for the management company's benefit. The terms are vague. Costs are listed as deductions from earnings but are not clearly known. I would be surprised if you received fair pay for your work under this agreement. I truly hope Miss Moreno didn't sign something similar. She should check her contract and finances, he said. Gary felt deflated. His plan to work with Selina and earn money for his course felt ruined. Mr. Nishimura noticed his expression and placed a hand on Gary's shoulder. All is not lost. I made notes for you to suggest changes to make the contract fairer. You just need to negotiate for a better deal. Gary forced a smile at the professor. Thank you, but I doubt the man who gave me the contract will want to discuss changes. I understand I can't sign this, so I won't be working on the album. He took a deep breath. It's okay. I really appreciate your help with this. He returned the guitar to the professor, took the contract and notes, and smiled at the two women, who looked at him with understanding. As he stepped into the hallway, he heard raised voices again. It was the wife and daughter arguing with the man. Gary was glad he didn't know how to speak Japanese. He walked to the cafeteria and found his study group there, except for Jasmine, who was resting at home. She would be taking a makeup exam soon. Brock was smiling, which made Gary feel more confident than before their tests. Lee turned to him, her smile fading as she saw his expression. What happened? She asked. Gary shrugged. It's a bad contract. I was advised not to sign it. The guy who offered it to me is difficult, so discussing changes is unlikely. It's a no-go. Lee looked sympathetic. I'm so sorry, Gary. I know you wanted to do the album and earn some money from it. You should consider taking action for not getting your permission for the first song. That might earn you something, she suggested again. Yeah, he sighed. I'm just going to call Selina to share the bad news. Give me a moment. Gary stepped outside and called Selina on his cell. It rang twice before she answered, slightly out of breath. Gary? Hi, Selina. How did it go? She asked eagerly. Not too well. I'm sorry, but I can't sign this contract. I spoke with a business law professor here at the college, and he told me the terms are vague and could prevent me from getting fair compensation. The document was created with Stefano's company in focus. It mentioned deductions from payments, but it didn't explain how much. The professor advised that it would be wise for you to check your own contract to make sure it isn't the same. Consider getting a lawyer to look it over and have an auditor check your finances. Selina felt quiet, and Gary was unsure of what to say. After a moment, he sighed. I'm really sorry. I was looking forward to working on the album with you and Greg this weekend. Now I can't. Thanks, Gary. The call ended. Gary felt bad after hearing the disappointment in her voice. He hoped she wasn't upset with him, but he couldn't change it now. With another sigh, he went back to his group before they headed off to the exam. Selina screamed in frustration to let out some of the anger inside her. She had been so excited about the weekend. The album was going to boost her career, and playing with Gary sparked her creativity. Their last jam session had been so uplifting. Selina wasn't truly angry at Gary. He had always been honest with her, and there was a real connection between them as artists. A deep frustration hit her, knowing that they couldn't work together because of Stefano. He became the target of her anger. She heard the front door open, and Greg walked in with grocery bags. He placed them on the counter while keeping an eye on her. He had been on edge all week, and Selina had reached her limit. What's wrong? Greg asked quietly. I just spoke with Gary. We can't record the album this weekend. His law professor looked over Stefano's contract and warned him not to sign it. He said it's a bad deal that could stop him from being fairly paid. The professor suggested we check our contracts too and have our finances reviewed. Every time I've mentioned this, Stefano has reacted badly. Hearing this from someone else makes me more certain I need to act. I'm reaching out to a law firm and an accountant today. Greg frowned at her. So, some kid thinks he can't understand a contract and we're going to risk our reputation and relationship with our agent, who has always supported us? Selina leaned back, surprised by Greg's harsh tone. This isn't just some kid. It's Gary. He has been honest since the night Stefano took his music for me. He hasn't been paid for that. He never agreed to it, and if he wanted to, he could take action against us, but he hasn't, right? Just give him a little time, Greg snapped back. What is wrong with you? Selina asked in disbelief. Why are you siding with Stefano instead of us? He could have changed your contract too. I'm going to confirm this with a lawyer and an accountant. If Gary's contract was the only issue at hand, we would move on. Don't do this, Greg suddenly begged. It's going to happen. The real question is, whose side will you be on? She said, her heart racing. Greg's face changed. He turned to leave. You're so stubborn, he muttered as he stormed out of the house again. Selina felt angry, frustrated, and a bit scared, but she refused to let that stop her from finding the answers she sought. Gary watched Lee happily dancing around the cafeteria. She seemed really excited about how she did on the exam. Brock, however, looked very down. Gary caught his eye. What's wrong? You were so sure before. Oh, that wasn't about the exam. I was thinking about a guy I met last night. He was something special. It was hard to forget. Lee listened intently to Brock's story, but Gary raised his hands to stop him from going further. Too much information, please! Brock laughed. Oh, Gary, you're too funny. Gary gave him a serious look. How did the exam go? Brock's laughter slowly faded, and he sighed. I think I passed, but not by much. Gary looked at his study partner in worry. But you said you understood everything. Another sigh came from Brock. I thought so too, but during the exam I just blanked out. My mind wandered elsewhere. Gary shook his head tiredly. That won't help you when you're looking for a job at an accounting firm, or maybe it will. Brock laughed as he met Gary's gaze. You're the best, Gary chuckled. Come on, let's review so we can all enjoy our weekends. He smiled at Lee. I'm sure Brock is eager to continue his fun activities. Brock was almost giggling as he looked at Gary with a big smile. You never let me down, Mr. Truman. After an hour, Gary finished reviewing the material with Lee and Brock, who quickly said their goodbyes and rushed off to enjoy their weekends. Gary felt a twinge of disappointment as he realized his weekend plans were now dashed. He hoped Selina was all right, and had taken the professor's advice to check her contract and notes. As Gary packed his books, he noticed Mr. Nishimura approaching with a briefcase in one hand and a guitar case in the other. The man had a serious expression. Hi, Mr. Nishimura. Are you heading home for the day? He asked. Mr. Truman, you're not very good at hiding the truth. Has anyone ever told you that? Mr. Nishimura replied grumpily. Gary recalled the man's wife asking him about the guitar. He forced a smile. It takes more than one person to make a plan. You didn't tell me what role I was supposed to play. Would it really have mattered? Haruki asked. Gary shook his head. No, you're right. I'm not good at hiding my feelings. I'm really bad at lying. The professor finally smiled. That isn't always a bad thing. I can usually keep a straight face, but my wife can read me easily. She manages our money and had no idea I bought the guitar. That's why I kept it a secret. He leaned the guitar case against the table. Gary looked at him with interest. If you didn't buy it, where did it come from? From something else my wife wouldn't like. She doesn't know I played poker at a friend's place with some visitors on Wednesday night. While she was at her book club, I decided to join in. At the very end of the night, I got lucky and had a winning hand. One of the guests didn't have enough money, so he put the guitar in the game. I won $25,000 that night. How much is the guitar worth? Gary asked. Haruki shrugged. We looked it up and it's worth about $5,000. Gary remembered how nice it sounded and nodded. It was a fine instrument. Now I have a problem. My wife is upset with me for gambling and lying about the guitar being yours, the professor said. Gary wasn't sure where this was leading, but he nodded. My wife and daughter told me that I can only make things right if I give you the guitar. What? They believe, and I agree, that you will take better care of it than I ever could, Haruki said with a sigh. Gary leaned in closer, wanting to keep the conversation private. You really can't give me a $5,000 guitar? He whispered. The man looked at him. It didn't really cost me. You're not one of my students right now, and my family will only talk to me again if I do this. Gary stared at him in disbelief as the man took out his phone and snapped a selfie with a big smile next to Gary, who smiled back without thinking. You really play beautifully. Please take this for my family, the professor said, shaking Gary's hand. As the professor walked off with his briefcase, Gary almost called out to remind him about the other case. He still couldn't believe what had just happened. Gary didn't want to open the guitar case in the cafeteria, so he secured his backpack and picked up the guitar case. It felt heavier than his acoustic one. The weight made it all feel more real to him. He decided to take it home until Mr. Nishimura changed his mind. He left the cafeteria and walked across the campus toward the subway entrance. Remembering his promise to Emma, he paused to look for excited Moreno fans before crossing the lane where he had nearly been hit the night before. There was no traffic tonight. He made it to the subway without any problems, but saw the train leaving just as he got to the platform. He watched it go, but his thoughts were far away. Only a few other people were waiting, so he stood his guitar case on its end and rested his hands on top. He was really happy he and Emma had reconnected. They still needed to find time for each other, but Emma said she would talk to Dennis about sharing the shifts with more people. Having only 3 shifts every day wasn't fair if they wanted to enjoy life. His eyes caught the next train coming in, but it wasn't his, so he went back to thinking about Emma. He wished he could have made the album with Selena, because it could have earned him some money to help with school. This would have made things easier and allowed him to take Emma out to a nice dinner, a movie, or even dancing. As the train rushed in, someone grabbed Gary from behind and pushed him toward the edge of the platform. Gary felt unsteady with the heavy backpack and the guitar case between his legs. The extra weight helped keep him from being pushed off entirely. The guitar slipped back and tripped the person behind him. He quickly turned just as the train sped by without stopping, glancing back at the angry face of Greg Yossman. "Greg, what?" Gary started to say, but Greg suddenly shoved him down onto the platform. Gary hit the side of his head against the armrest of a bench, and lights danced in front of his eyes. "Ouch!" Gary exclaimed as he fell. "You've ruined everything!" Greg shouted as he stood over Gary. Disoriented from the impact, Gary could only stare at the upset man. "She's going to find out. She'll learn the truth about me." Greg continued to yell, though his voice dropped as tears filled his eyes. There was a deep sadness forming in his tone. Greg paced in front of Gary, glaring down at him. "She'll find out I let Stefano take from her for years. I even took a share because she was the talented one, and I was so jealous." He was breathing heavily, tears rolling down his face. "Now everything is ruined because you made her suspicious about Stefano and got her to check the accounts." Gary focused on Greg's face as the man shook his head wildly. I can't face her," he said, taking a harsh breath and looking away from Gary, who was still on the ground, holding onto his guitar case for support. "I can't carry this weight anymore." Greg looked at Gary with intensity. "Tell her I cared for her." "I'm sorry," Gary said. To his shock, Greg stepped back off the platform just as the next train rolled into the station. Someone shouted. The train screeched to a stop and Gary shut his eyes. He could still see the despair in Greg's face as he disappeared just before the train rushed past. Gary's head ached, but he slowly managed to sit up as people hurried across the platform. A man crouched next to him speaking, but Gary couldn't focus on the words. It was all too much to handle. "Sir, can you hear me?" the man asked. Gary looked at him and saw he was in uniform. "What?" "Can you understand me?" the policeman questioned. "Yes, my head hurts." The man nodded. "An ambulance is on its way. You should be okay." He pressed something soft against Gary's head, and Gary flinched, taking a quick breath. "Stay still. This will help. What's your name?" Gary. Truman. "Do you know the name of the person involved? Did you know him?" the officer asked. Gary's gaze met the officer's curious look. "Yes, Greg Yossman. I didn't know him well. I just played music with him once." The officer's eyebrows raised. "Yossman? The musician?" Gary felt overwhelmed by what had happened. He had to tell Selena. "Someone needs to inform Selena. She shouldn't find out from the news." "We will handle that, sir. Who can we contact for you?" the officer asked. Gary was startled, confused. "I'm not dying." The officer quickly clarified. "No, I mean to meet you at the hospital." "Oh, Emma Patricks." He gave the officer her information. "She might be teaching a class right now." His head throbbed and he winced again. The platform was bustling now, and some EMTs arrived to assist the officer. "What happened to you?" one of the medics asked. Gary blinked, noticing the heavy Brooklyn accent. He glanced at the bench nearby. "I was thrown against that." The paramedic noticed the blood on the armrest. Then he used a small flashlight, which made Gary wince. "My head hurts," Gary whispered. The EMT looked at his partner. "Let's get him on the stretcher. We should check for a head injury," he said, turning to the officer. "Do we have a name?" "Gary Truman," said the officer. "Hey, Gary, let's take off your backpack." The man unclipped the buckles and slipped the straps off Gary's shoulders. He grunted as he lifted it. "Wow, what do you have in here? Weights?" "My accounting books," Gary replied, and the medic chuckled as he handed it to the police officer. As they tried to lift Gary onto the stretcher, he held onto the handle of his guitar case. "Gary, you need to let go of the case." "No," Gary mumbled, his headache intensifying. "Officer Franklin will take care of it," the medic assured him. "He's following us to the hospital," the medic said. Gary looked at the officer and saw him nod. He relaxed his grip, and the EMT handed the bag to the officer. Once he was lying on the stretcher, Gary let out a sigh. "Stay awake, Gary," the EMT said. Gary wondered if that was the worst advice he could get. Hours later, Gary was sitting in a chair at a police station, facing Detective Delgado again. After getting stitches for his injury, Officer Franklin had brought Gary and Emma to the station and handed them over to the detective. The clock on the wall showed it was almost 2 a.m. Gary's face hurt, and his head was starting to throb again as the painkillers he got at the hospital wore off. His face was bruised and swollen, especially around his left eye. His backpack was at his feet, and the guitar case leaned against the desk. He rested his foot on the case, but still felt upset about having it. If it hadn't been for the heavy books in his backpack and the guitar case getting in the way, Gary could have been in a much worse situation. On this awful night, the only good thing was Emma, sitting next to him and holding onto his arm. Her support was a great comfort. Beside Emma was Selena Moreno. She had arrived shortly after Gary and Emma. They had hugged and cried together, and being with her seemed to help. Selena's eyes were still a bit red from crying, but she was managing to stay strong now. Detective Delgado looked at Selena. "Did Mr. Yosman drive a tan 80s Oldsmobile?" Selena shook her head. "No, Greg didn't have a car. Stefano drives a tan Cutlass, probably from the 80s. He felt scared of Gary." "Now we know why." The detective nodded and noted that information. Another officer came to the desk and spoke to the detective, handing him a printed form. "We found a lead on Mancini. He took a re-dive flight to Buenos Aires, Argentina last night. You might want to check with your bank in the morning to see if he had access to your accounts." Selena nodded slightly. After gathering a few more details, the detective thanked them for their help and said the hit and run case was officially closed. The subway incident with Gary was also being shut down. Selena, Emma, and Gary shared a glance and stood up. Gary felt a bit wobbly, so Emma steadied him. Selena looked sad, but Gary gave her a comforting hug before they headed out to the street. A car service limo pulled up for Selena, and she turned to Gary and Emma. "Let me give you a ride home." Gary wasn't going to say no, and Emma smiled gratefully at her. Once they were settled in the car, Emma told the driver their address, and Selena raised the privacy divider between them and the driver. Then she turned to look at the young couple. "I'm really sorry about everything. Gary said this was all my fault," he said quietly. "No, Gary, this was Stefano's fault. And Greg's. Greg was jealous of my talent, so he let Stefano take money from me for years and used it for himself. He would have come clean a long time ago if he truly cared about me." She shook her head sadly. "I know Greg left everything to me in his will, so maybe I can get some of that money back." "What about the money your manager took?" Emma asked. Selena's smile turned chill. "Stefano picked a bad place to run away to. I have family there who really look out for each other. He'll be met with some surprises when he arrives." She shrugged, and her smile faded. "I still have a lot of sadness to deal with, but I need some hope. Something good to look forward to." She looked Gary in the eye. "Once all of this is over and I find a good manager who is honest, can we work together to make that album?" Gary smiled back. "Yes, I would love to." "Thank you, Gary. I'm sorry you got caught up in all my troubles. To make it up to you for the song we did at Rockies, send me the details and I'll pay for the next year of your course. I'll also get you a good contract when we meet again." Emma was overjoyed, but Gary was shocked. "Thank you so much. That's such a relief. I want you to know I don't blame you for what Stefano or Greg did. You are a wonderful person and an incredibly talented artist. I can't wait to make music with you soon." Selena's eyes shone as she smiled at him. The limo pulled up in front of their place, and Gary and Emma hugged Selena before getting out. Emma helped them inside the building and into their apartment before Gary finally let go of the guitar case. "You've been holding on to that case like it's precious all night. I didn't know you brought it to college," Emma said as he stretched his fingers. "This isn't my guitar, well, it's not my usual one," Gary said, feeling flustered. She took a closer look. "I didn't even notice it was different. I guess I had other things to think about." He smiled. "Mr. Nishimura, the professor I talked to about the contract, gave me his guitar at the end of the day. His wife and daughter heard me play it, and they insisted he give it to me." He opened the case, and Emma gasped. "Oh, wow, it's beautiful. Is it an electric guitar?" Gary nodded. "If he doesn't change his mind and wants it back, I have to learn how to play it, which means I'll need a small amplifier and headphones." Then he sighed. "Or I could sell it and use the money for my final year of college." "No, you can't sell this beautiful guitar. Plus, selling it won't pay for your course," Emma argued. Gary met her gaze. "You're right, but it would really help with the expenses. It's a $5,000 guitar." Emma's eyes widened, and she covered her mouth with her hands. When she regained her composure, she shook her head. "I can't handle any more surprises tonight. Let's just go to bed. Are you okay to sleep?" Gary nodded. "The doctor said I don't have a concussion." "I should probably leave a message for Dennis to find someone else for tomorrow's classes," Emma said. Gary placed his hands on her shoulders and looked into her beautiful blue eyes, filled with concern. "I'll be all right. I promise to take it easy tomorrow. Nothing too demanding or stressful for my brain either. Let's see how I feel in the morning." They changed into their sleepwear, brushed their teeth, then crawled under the covers. "Could you do laundry tomorrow?" Emma asked quietly. Gary chuckled softly. "Of course, my love." Emma nestled close, while Gary tried to ignore the images flashing in his mind of Greg as he fell before the train. It took him much longer than Emma to drift off to sleep. Gary managed to assure Emma that he was fine alone, so she didn't call in to take the day off. Dennis had been a bit irritable lately, and she didn't want to risk him taking the classes from her. Yet, she had been receiving great feedback from the clients. As she walked the last block to the building, she enjoyed the warm afternoon sun on her face. Living in the city often felt like being surrounded by tall buildings that blocked out real sunlight. She tilted her face up to the rays and smiled, savoring the warmth. Just as she was enjoying it, she stepped into a shadow. She glanced up in annoyance and froze. It was a large billboard blocking the light, but the image on it made her heart race and made it hard to breathe. There she was, huge on the billboard, wearing that tight purple workout outfit. Her jaw dropped as she realized the picture had been edited to draw attention to parts of her she never wanted highlighted. It was her body, but she never smiled like that when she wore the outfit. More dishonest editing was happening here. Most importantly, she wanted that billboard taken down. Immediately. Angry, she rushed the last block into the club. She spotted Dennis walking around and went straight to confront him. Dennis smiled brightly at her and tried to lighten the mood. "Hey, did you see that amazing billboard? It's already bringing in customers. I look good too." Emma knew he was trying to calm her down, but he had crossed a line this time. It was time for him to start paying attention. Seeing her ready to confront him, Dennis raised his hands and gestured for her to follow him to his office. They stepped inside and he closed the door behind her, then took a seat at his desk. Emma stood in front of his desk with her arms crossed tightly. "I never agreed to the picture you used or the outfit. That's a changed photo and it's embarrassing. I want it taken down." Dennis was starting to get frustrated with Emma's attitude. At first, her small-town habits were charming, but now they were putting their costly marketing plan at risk. Lately, she hadn't been coming in much, making him doubt her commitment to the job. Now she was causing more trouble. If she weren't so popular, he would have sent her away already. He understood he couldn't change her mind about the billboard, so he decided to show her how things worked in the city. "I don't need your approval for the image or outfit. You signed a form that allows me to use the pictures however I want." He gave her a condescending smile. "I never signed that form." Dennis stared at her for a moment, then frowned. Of course you did. Dino gave you the clipboard. I saw you leave it on the front desk after you took it to the changing room. I took it to the front desk because the pen didn't work. Then you hurried us out before I had the chance to sign. I didn't sign anything. Take the billboard down. Dennis remembered pulling her out of the office to avoid an awkward situation. He frowned. I've already paid for the printing and the space for the next 3 months. Then take it down or I will quit and take action. Seeing the determination in her eyes pushed Dennis over the edge, and he leaned back in his chair in frustration. You ungrateful person. After everything I've done for you. Emma leaned forward over his desk, resting her hands on the surface. I never asked for your help. I would have succeeded on my own. Dennis smirked at her words, not wanting to take them seriously. You only got those opportunities because I stepped in to give you Yvonne's sessions. Emma blinked in surprise. Yvonne had a contract that allowed her to renew as long as she was able, or I bought her out. She had to leave so you could shine. I made that happen for you. I never wanted that, Emma exclaimed. Oh, come on. You took all the time slots, even the ones Yvonne didn't take. You were the one who benefited the most. You put a good trainer in a tough spot and told me I would only cover her sessions while she healed. You asked me to do a photo shoot and change the picture to make me look over-sexualized. I didn't sign anything. Then when my classes became popular, you added extra ones without asking if I could manage. There are many great trainers here. You could have shared those extra sessions, but you took advantage of me. Emma shot him a look filled with disdain. You're terrible. I want nothing to do with your bad choices. I'm done. You can't leave. I did those things to help you. I made you who you are, Dennis shouted. Emma pushed away from the desk and walked out of the office. She needed to be in a place where others could see what would happen next. Dennis jumped up, feeling angry and ready to confront her. Then he noticed the alert on his phone blinking. His face turned white as he remembered their argument from when she leaned against his desk. Oh no. He quickly turned off the alert and heard the sound it made since his door was now open. He hurried out to find everyone looking at him. Many were on their phones, but their eyes were glued to him. Emma stood with the other trainers, her eyes fixed on him. He was in trouble. Dennis decided to run. Nancy Delaney waited for the other trainers to finish talking to Emma before approaching her. That was amazing! Emma smiled back, then her face fell. Now that I've quit, how will I get that billboard taken down? Did Dennis ever give you a contract? The lawyer asked. Emma shook her head. I was just covering for Yvonne until she got back. I just had a regular job contract. Nancy placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Leave it to me. After I'm done with Dennis and the fitness club chain, he will have nothing, and they will be begging you to return. You didn't sign the model release? They gave me an empty pen to sign it, and then Dennis hurried me out of the office, so I forgot, Emma explained. Nancy grinned. How much did they change the photo? She asked. Emma sighed. It's my head and body, but the photographer only got one photo of me in that outfit. I changed into my regular clothes right after. I wasn't smiling like I am on the billboard when he took that shot. He also made my figure look bigger. Nancy smiled widely, excited for the challenge. I'll take down the photographer, too. Emma looked worried. I was just joking about suing Dennis. I don't have money for a lawsuit, and I just lost my job. Nancy gave her arm another comforting pat. Emma, I'm going to do this for free. It feels good to make things right. Emma gave a hopeful smile in return. Honestly, Nancy's help wasn't just out of kindness. She wanted to keep Emma as a trainer at the club because she always felt great after their sessions. She also enjoyed taking down people like Dennis and his shady photographer friend. This case would be particularly satisfying. Gary finished his exams and his college year was over. With his second year paid for, Gary felt less stressed, but he knew he needed to look further to find new bookkeeping clients to help pay for his third year. He hoped that the album Selena was planning to produce might bring in some money, but since he didn't understand the music business, he wouldn't rely on that. As June began, the weather got nicer and the summer forecasts were looking good. In the first week of June, Gary and Emma received an invitation to a celebration of life event for Greg Yossman. They prepared for a long weekend and met at Selena's house early Friday morning. She had arranged a comfortable coach to take her and some friends to Martha's Vineyard. Gary brought his guitars, as she had asked, since many musicians would be there, leading to fun jam sessions. Emma was thrilled to see so many talented people from the music world boarding the bus, and Gary was happy to meet them, too. There were 3 guitarists, 2 bass players, a keyboardist, a drummer, and 3 friendly women who sang backup in Selena's band. Selena mentioned more guests would arrive on their own. Everyone on the bus was very welcoming, especially when Selena introduced Gary as the mystery guitarist from her last album. Emma got along with everyone just by being herself. The ride lasted over 5 hours, but the time sped by thanks to lively conversations and shared memories. When the bus reached the mansion, Gary and Emma looked out the window, surprised by the large 2-story building. It was impressive. On one side, 3 delivery trucks were parked. People hurried from the trucks into the house carrying boxes and food trays. Gary guessed these were the caterers preparing for the event. Once everyone exited the bus, Selena addressed them. "Please see Janice to get your assigned rooms. You can have a quick lunch in the dining room where there are sandwiches, both vegan and regular, and salads. You have the rest of the afternoon to explore the grounds or relax on the beach. Dinner will be served in the dining room at 8 tonight." She smiled warmly. "Welcome!" Everyone grabbed their bags and walked to the side entrance, where a cheerful brunette awaited them with a tablet and some floor plans. She helped them find their assigned rooms. Following the map, Gary and Emma discovered their room on the 2nd floor, which had a beautiful view of the beach. The room looked beautiful, and they had a nice bathroom with a big shower. "Let's go for a run on the beach," Emma said quickly, smiling brightly. Gary rolled his eyes but knew she was right. He hadn't been running as much as she had. For the past 2 weeks, Emma had been in touch with a lawyer friend who was talking to the people in charge at the gym where she used to work. Mrs. Delaney was also helping Yvonne with her case against them for free. Nancy had convinced her to wait for an answer from the gym before looking for a new job, and the lawyer believed they would respond soon. Emma and Gary were relieved to find out the billboard was no longer showing Emma's face to strangers passing by. The photographer also didn't have a license to work in New York. When Nancy told Emma she would take care of things, she meant it. "Come on, Mr. Lazybones," Emma joked, and Gary quickly put on his running clothes and followed her downstairs, out the front door, and along the path to the beach. They paused on the firmer sand by the water and took in the fresh sea air. Emma began stretching with a big smile, and Gary joined her. Once they were warmed up, Emma led them down the shoreline, and Gary matched her pace. They exchanged silly grins as they ran. It felt like paradise. Gary was very hungry by the time dinner arrived. Janice stood at the entrance, directing people to their tables. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves and shared a love for music, which kept the conversation flowing without any issues. Emma and Gary found themselves sitting next to Selena. Dinner was served buffet-style again, so they filled their plates with hot roast beef, steamed vegetables, and a side salad before returning to their table. Raven, Delia, and Letitia, Selena's backup singers, joined their group, and there was plenty of laughter during the meal. Emma was impressed by how well they could sing together. Years of practice had paid off. After dinner, everyone was invited to bring their instruments down to the lower level, where a spacious room with couches was set up in a circle. Anyone who wanted to join in could, and equipment would be provided for electric instruments. Gary took his acoustic guitar downstairs and noticed Emma talking to a group of musicians with long hair. "What's this?" Gary asked as he approached Emma, raising an eyebrow at the men. Emma saw he wasn't too worried, but she took his hand to reassure him. "Just chatting with one of the few single ladies here." "We didn't see a ring on her finger," said a guy with a bass guitar. "Emma and I share a connection that goes beyond any old traditions. It's really about 2 people joining together. Keep that in mind when you come around with your weak lines," Gary said with a cheeky smile. He nodded to the guys and then took Emma's hand to walk away. She smiled back at him. "That was smooth, Gary." He nodded. "It's true, too. What if I like traditions and old customs?" she asked softly. "Then you can have those," he replied, looking her in the eye. She held his gaze, and after a moment she nodded back with a pleased smile. "Gary!" They turned to see Selena waving him over. They joined her and 2 others, and she introduced them. "Gary and Emma, this is Eric Gladstone, my bass player, and this is Julie Punk, my percussionist." They greeted each other with friendly smiles. Eric was a tall, strong man with a serious face that made his bright yellow SpongeBob shirt seem out of place. Julie was also tall but very thin. She had a fit look in her sleeveless shirt, ripped jeans, and sturdy boots. She had shaved the sides of her head, and her hair on top was long and wild. Eric and Julie have been with me from the start. They were with Greg before I joined. Stefano didn't take money from them, just from me. Did you get back any money Stefano took? Emma asked. Selena smiled slyly. Yes, Stefano changed his mind when he got to Buenos Aires. He returned the money he had taken from me over the years. There was even more than I thought. My family there were happy about how generous he suddenly became. Gary smiled at her but chose not to ask what happened to Stefano afterwards. Instead, he placed a hand on Emma's back to steer the conversation. Do you have a cassette tape player? Selena thought for a moment. We don't really use cassettes anymore, but there might be one in the studio. Eric, do you know? He nodded. There should be an old one there. What have you got? He asked Gary. Opening his guitar case, Gary took out 3 cassettes he found in boxes under their bed. That's a nice old Gibson, Eric said, admiring the guitar. Gary smiled back. It came with the apartment we moved into. The cassettes did too, but I don't know what's on them. Julie looked puzzled. What kind of apartment comes with a guitar? He shrugged. The last renter left it behind when he traveled the world. Emma raised an eyebrow at Gary with a teasing look. He's leaving out that the older gentleman learned he was very sick, chose to take a trip, and unfortunately passed away while he was gone. He had no family, so the landlord said we could take everything in the apartment. Great find, Eric said as he reached out for the cassettes, and Gary nodded while handing them over. Eric looked at the labels with interest. Burn, April 1989. Selena raised an eyebrow. I wonder what burn means. Julie smiled. I've heard of burning a CD or a DVD, but not a cassette. Eric shook his head. CD burning didn't become common until after the late 90s, not back in 1989. He checked the other 2 labels. Burn, November 1987, burn, July 1988. He frowned. This is making me curious. Let's go listen. He walked ahead with Selena, Julie, Emma, and Gary following. They left the big room, walked down a hall, and entered a door on the left, halfway down. They found themselves in a control room for a recording studio, with lots of equipment on one wall. There was a large audio mixing station with many controls. Greg smiled at Emma, who looked around in amazement. Selena turned on the mixing board, and Eric went to the wall where a dual cassette player was set up. He turned that on and inserted one of the cassettes. Selena adjusted one of the controls on the board and nodded to Eric, who pressed play. The tape was quiet at first, then a distant whistle could be heard before fading away. A kettle? Emma asked, smiling, and Selena and Eric nodded in agreement. They heard a few more everyday sounds, and Eric reached for the fast-forward button. Wait, he's talking, Selena said, raising her hand to stop him. A deep voice approached the recorder. Burn, April 1989. Let's do this. Eric's expression changed. He looked at Julie. Go get Benny, he said, excited. Gary watched and smiled as he recognized the sound of a guitar. It had a deep, warm tone. The sound turned into a melody that was slow and sad, bringing to mind a smoky atmosphere of a cozy stage, pure blues. Julie returned with an older man. He had a coffee-colored complexion, peppery gray hair, and a trimmed beard. He wore dark glasses and nicer clothes than anyone else there. He looked at the group with curiosity, then slowly smiled as the voice they had heard began to sing. Gary watched Benny's face change with emotion. Recognition shifted to joy, curiosity, and then confusion as he tried to understand. I don't know this one, Benny said quietly. How? He asked with wonder. A fleeting look of sadness crossed his face before he fixed his gaze on Eric. What recording is this? Eric looked at Benny closely. You know who this is? Benny frowned. That's not funny. Of course I recognize Casey's voice. When was this recorded? I don't recognize the lyrics, and I know all of his songs. April 1989, Eric said. Benny's expression changed. What? That's impossible. He died in 1982. Apparently not. Gary and Emma found his hiding place when they moved to New York City. He looked to Gary. "Last summer," Gary said. Eric nodded. "They moved into an apartment of an older man who had a serious illness, took a trip around the world, and passed away on the journey. Gary found Casey's guitar under the bed and these cassettes." He held up the other two, and Benny took them and read the labels. "Who was Casey?" Gary asked. Benny snorted but looked a bit uncertain. "Good question. The man lived to change who he was. When I met him in '68, he'd already had 2 stage names and settled on Casey Byrne Burnell, a new voice in blues. I was learning how to play, and he helped me even though he was just 5 years older. I ended up being his friend for a long time. We shared a house in New Orleans during the '70s. Then he got sick and fought hard. I thought he was winning, then he disappeared." "Who told you he died?" Selena asked. "A fan sent me his obituary from a newspaper in Arizona," Benny said as he thought about it. Finally, he shook his head. "It's sad. To be that talented and only leave behind a few cassettes." Emma exchanged a glance with Gary. Selena noticed. "What is it, Emma?" "Gary brought 3 tapes, but there are 5 shoeboxes full of cassettes," she said as she watched their reactions. "Wow!" Benny exclaimed. They were quiet as Burns sang about his lost love. "This is really good," Gary said. Everyone nodded but stayed quiet. Benny finally spoke. He went back to writing and playing, but he didn't share anything. With that many cassettes, he might have hundreds of new songs. "Why didn't he release them?" Emma asked. "Maybe he left behind his stage identity, but his creativity stayed strong," Benny suggested. Selena looked at Eric and nodded. He turned off the player and rewound the tape. Once it was done, he put the cassette back in the case and handed it to Gary. He placed it back into the guitar case. "Is that Casey's guitar?" Benny asked. "No, it's Gary's," Selena said. The older man nodded. "Yes, I didn't mean anything by that. You've shown you can create magic with it." He smiled at Gary. Selena's eyes brightened. "That reminds me. I brought the recording Greg made the last time we played with Gary. After the celebration of life tomorrow, I'll play some tunes from it for everyone at the gathering." "Let's join the others and see if anyone is doing something fun," Eric said. They turned off the equipment and left the small control room to go back to the main space where they could hear music, laughter, and friendly chats. They listened for a while, and then the musicians finished their set. Everyone clapped, and Selena pulled Gary and Emma back to the big couch where Eric had his bass, and Julia was sitting in front of some digital drum pads. She twirled the drumsticks in her strong hands and smiled at Gary. "Do you want to get your electric guitar?" Selena asked. "I'll get it," Emma said cheerfully, hurrying away. Selena smiled. "She has a lot of energy." Gary nodded with a fond smile. "You have no idea." Eric handed Gary an instrument cable. "What will you do with all those tapes of Burns' songs?" he asked. Gary shook his head. "I don't know. I really don't want them to sit on those old tapes. I'm not sure how much longer they'll last. Tapes won't last forever. They should be turned into digital files and shared somewhere." "I totally agree," Benny said as he joined them with another musician who appeared older but had much darker skin than his friends. "So it's true. You have many tapes of Burns' music?" the newcomer asked. Gary looked at him and nodded. "Maybe we can work out a deal to buy them from you," the man offered. "Oscar, Gary isn't in the business yet, and we haven't even signed him yet. If Gary is interested, he should get a business manager to help him understand the value of the recordings." "Look who's turning into a businesswoman," Oscar replied. Selena frowned. "That should have happened sooner." Oscar switched gears. "I thought he was a musician," he said, as Emma came back with Gary's electric guitar case. Emma smiled as she carefully passed the guitar to Gary, who smiled and gave her a quick kiss, making her grin even more. "Gary hasn't played professionally yet and doesn't have a manager," Selena continued. "Once we get him to sign the contract I brought, we'll be working on a studio album." Oscar raised his eyebrows. "With a tour?" "Not with me," Gary said firmly to clarify. "That's not the way to become a famous musician," Oscar suggested. Gary smiled back at him. "That's fine by me. I plan to be an accountant." Oscar laughed, but it faded when Gary looked at him seriously. "You're not joking," Oscar exclaimed. "Gary is a great bookkeeper already," Emma said proudly. "Music is his way to relax." After giving her a gentle nudge with his shoulder and grinning, Gary took his new guitar out of the case, and the people around them widened their eyes. "Not a professional, and you have such a beautiful and pricey guitar?" Benny asked. Gary shrugged a bit shyly. "It was a gift, from a fan of my performance that night at Rocky's." "Rocky's?" Oscar asked. Selena smiled. "It was the small club in Gary's neighborhood where we first played together. My latest song?" The man's eyes brightened. Then he glanced at Gary. "That sounds like an amazing gift." "I think so too," he said honestly. "What should we play?" Julie asked. Gary smiled. "Can I make a request?" he asked, and they nodded. "Since I first played this on an electric guitar, I've wanted to do it with other instruments and vocals." "What song?" Selena asked with curiosity. "Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits," he replied, looking hopeful. Selena turned to Oscar. "Gary's on lead guitar, but we need another. Would you like to join us?" The man nodded with excitement. "Benny, would you be our keyboard player?" Benny also nodded with a smile. Once they had the extra instruments set up, Gary finished tuning his guitar, and Eric adjusted the amp so Gary could get the best sound. They were ready to begin. The other guests gathered around to see how the new member would blend in. Holding her microphone, Selena looked at her percussionist. "Give us a beat, Julie." The music started, and Gary's happy smile showed that he was living a dream. She felt so joyful to be part of it. The next day was perfect for Greg's celebration of life. Saturday began with clear blue skies, and by noon, the horizon over the ocean was filled with fluffy white clouds that looked like big, soft castles floating by. Rows of chairs were placed on the lawn with a small podium. The gentle breeze from the ocean kept everyone cool as they took turns speaking about their memories of Greg. There was much laughter, a few playful comments, and some tears, but Greg had touched everyone's lives in a positive way. When the speeches finished, Selena played 3 of the songs she, Greg, and Gary had performed that night, ending with the new song. After the last notes faded, there was a buzz of excitement in the crowd. Selena returned to the podium to thank everyone for coming, then noticed the enthusiasm. Benny stood to face her. "Selena, we think that was some of Greg's best work. How many tracks did you record that night?" he asked. She smiled warmly at Gary. "We recorded 10 tracks, including the new song." "You have Greg's keyboard part in the recording?" Benny asked, and Selena nodded. Benny looked at the hopeful faces around him, then back to Selena. "This would make a wonderful tribute album. We'd all be eager to help with it." Selena blinked, surprised by the idea. She looked at the others and saw their encouraging smiles. A smile grew on her face as she felt a wave of emotion. "That would be amazing." "Let's go inside and see how we can make this happen," Benny suggested. They spent the rest of the day reviewing the song list and matching it with the available musicians. Since there were more artists than tracks, Selena and Benny decided to make it a double album. The first disc would have the original 10 songs with Gary, and the second disc would feature Greg's favorites, updated and supported by the other artists. To help customers who liked digital music, they planned to add a link on Selena's online store where people who bought the album could listen to the songs. It was a big task, but everyone was excited to take part. Janice was asked to track which artists were on which songs to make sure everyone was credited and paid for their work. Emma decided to help Janice with organizing the musicians, making sure they were in the right places at the right times. She also took photos of each artist, along with some fun, candid shots for the album cover. Her cheerful attitude helped even the most difficult musicians relax and enjoy the process. Selena would sing on every song, and she asked Gary to play on about half of the tracks on the second disc because she felt they needed a refresh. "Could I see the contract now?" Gary asked her with a smile. Benny laughed and sat down with them to go over the contract Selena had gotten for Gary from her new agent. He explained everything Gary wanted to know. In the end, Gary signed it and shook hands with Selena and Benny, who witnessed it for him. Dinner that night was a casual buffet, but no one seemed very hungry as everyone was filled with excitement. They planned to practice that night to get through as many songs as possible for the next day. The rest would be worked on Monday. Janice prepared a schedule for which songs would be recorded in what order, depending on when the artists could be there. Some guests were leaving the next morning, so they needed to finish 2 of the tracks that night. Gary sat with Eric, Benny, and Oscar, who were still trying to make a deal for the cassettes. when Emma hurried over to Gary and gave him a quick kiss. "Mr. Truman, you need to head to the studio downstairs to record your first track, Glory Days." Eric smiled. "I like this new way of getting messages. I can't wait for my turn." Emma laughed, then looked at Eric apologetically. "I'm sorry, Mr. Gladstone, but the KISS service is for a very special group of artists. Right now, it's just one name on the list." "And that's how it will stay," Gary said with a smile. Then he glanced at Emma nervously. "I was hoping to have tonight to go over the songs and learn them a bit. I don't know Glory Days." Emma smiled back at him encouragingly. "Can you play the song for me first? We have a tight schedule," she said. With a bright wave, she turned and hurried off to find her next artist. "You're a lucky guy, Gary," Eric sighed. "Can't argue with that. Talk later," Gary replied to the group and rushed down to the studio. Selena looked up, smiled, and noticed the worry on his face. "I'm not familiar with Glory Days. Can I listen to it first and then get your thoughts?" Gary asked. Selena smiled and pulled it up on her phone. They listened as the other musicians arrived and got ready. As the song played, Gary worked with his guitar, trying to find the right notes, feeling the sound and how it fit. He nodded as he thought about the melody. Selena glanced around the room, seeing she had everyone's attention. Greg loved this song because it reminded him of his father, who always talked about his own glory days in high school football. Everyone knows the original except for Gary, I think. "He's playing lead guitar and he doesn't know the song?" their keyboard player asked, surprised. "Pete, it's okay. He's heard the song and I want to hear his take on it," Selena said to reassure him. Pete still seemed unsure. "I guess we have all night," he replied with a frown. Gary looked at him apologetically, but Pete turned back to Selena. "What do you think of the tone?" Gary asked. "Bright and cheerful in the chorus, but a bit sad toward the end," Selena replied. Gary nodded. "Okay, here's my idea." He closed his eyes and began to play the song as it started. When it moved to the chorus, he opened it up like a crowd cheering for their team. The energy soared, then he brought it back down for the next verse. Suddenly he stopped and looked at Selena. "The second chorus will be big like the first. When the bridge starts, Greg's keyboard solo comes in, then back to the final verse, and the outro will be a softer version of the chorus. Does that work?" "It changes the song. That chorus is way too lively," Pete protested. "I may not have my own glory days yet. Maybe these are my glory days. But I've heard my dad talk about his school years, and those stories always felt larger than life. Shouldn't the music show that?" Gary explained. "Okay, we can give it a shot, but the last chorus and outro should reflect the passing of time," Selena said, and Gary agreed. Selena stepped into a smaller room in the studio to record her vocals separately. It had a window that looked into the main studio and the control room. "We're going to try it," she said into her mic. Gary took a deep breath as doubt swirled in his mind. The reality of working in a professional recording with skilled musicians sank in. He was also pretty sure that Pete didn't like him or his version of the song. He glanced up at the control room window and saw Emma. She was smiling, showing her complete trust in him. He felt his nervousness fade away, just like it had when he was on stage at Rocky's that night. "I love you," he mouthed. She smiled and said it back to him, making him grin again. He could do this. With Emma's love, he felt capable of anything. The music surrounded him, and he allowed his feelings to flow through it. Acknowledging that he didn't have much of his own past glory to recall, he understood Pete's concerns about the bright tone he had initially given the chorus. When he played it now, he softened it with genuine longing. Selena's voice was strong and full of emotion, giving the song its spirit. Pete's solo in the bridge was inspiring, and Gary couldn't help but smile and nod to himself as he brought that feeling into his final run through the chorus, leaving the outro with a touch of sadness. When the last note faded, Gary opened his eyes and saw smiles on the musicians' faces. The control room mic clicked on. "That was really great for a first try. Selena, come in here and let me know if you think we're ready." She hurried out of her booth to join them in the control room to listen to the playback. Pete walked over with a strange look on his face, but he had a smile, too. "You didn't play it the same way this time." Gary shook his head. "You were right. I was getting too caught up in my annoyance with my father's glory days stories. I made it too bright, so I toned it down." Pete nodded and then looked over at the window to the control room to see the excitement. "Wow, "I think it worked," he said. The room's mic went on again as they watched Selena dance with joy. The sound engineer leaned closer to the mic. "That's a wrap, everyone. First track is a success." "Wow, I've never been part of a successful first take." Julie grinned from behind her drums. Pete turned back to Gary, who shook his head and raised his hands with a smile. "Don't look at me. That was just good luck." He laughed. The keyboardist just smiled and nodded before heading out. The other artists who weren't part of the second recording session went upstairs as Emma dashed off to gather the missing talent. Selena burst into the studio. "That was an amazing take. Do you need help with the next one?" Gary nodded. All he could remember about September's Kiss was that it was one of Selena's powerful ballads. She played it for him, but he couldn't see a place for change since everything depended on the vocals. "What do you think, Gary?" Selena asked. He looked at her and shrugged. "I don't see what needs to change here. The instruments are just background to your singing." "Yes, but it needs something new, a fresh emotional vibe, like My Soul, Your Sanctuary," she insisted. "You want to record it at Rocky's?" Gary asked with a smile. She laughed, then suddenly paused. She turned to look through the control room window. "Emma?" she called as she saw the cheerful redhead coming back. Emma looked over and nodded. "Gary needs his acoustic guitar. Wait. Gary waved his hands to stop Emma from leaving in a hurry. Selena glanced back at him. Gary looked a bit nervous. Don't think I can solve this one." When she frowned, ready to argue, he raised a hand. "Can you play the song again?" She still frowned, but played it again on her phone. They listened for a moment. Then her face lit up and she smiled at Gary. She turned back to Emma. "Can you ask Pete to come back to the studio?" Emma nodded and hurried away. Gary felt relieved. He thought the piano was a better fit too. Selena smiled at Gary. "I thought you weren't interested in playing with me anymore." He laughed and shook his head. "I will be busy tomorrow and the next day, and I doubt we will get it right on the first try." The singer nodded. "Yeah, that was just a little lucky moment happening, but I'm happy with it." Gary smiled back. "I totally agree." Pete came back to the studio looking at Selena with curiosity. "Would you like to do an acoustic version of September's Kiss with me, just piano and vocals?" she asked. Pete's happy face showed he was excited. Gary smiled too, packed his guitar into its case, and waved goodbye to everyone as he left. He bumped into Emma in the hallway and hugged her. "That was fun," he said. "It was magical," Emma replied with a smile. "You're the magic one, my genie," he whispered, making her grin even wider. "Gary, where are you?" a voice called out. He and Emma looked toward the stairs to see Eric coming down with a serious look. "What's up?" Gary asked. "We need to practice for tomorrow. We have a lot of songs to go through," Eric insisted. Gary looked surprised. "I thought we would do that tomorrow." Eric rolled his eyes. He finishes one track in one take, and now he thinks all of them will be that easy. "You heard about that?" Gary asked, feeling worried. "Pete told everyone, let's go. We have to practice," Eric said, suddenly smiling. Emma smiled at Gary's groan, kissed his cheek, then gently pushed him along. Music wouldn't wait, but magic would. Gary spent Sunday and Monday in the studio, playing one song after another. When he wasn't in the studio, he practiced with Eric and Julie. For the first album, the audio engineer used Greg's keyboard tracks from their jam night recording. For the second album, they brought in 3 different keyboard players. While they got 2 more songs done on the first try over the 2 days, most took several tries. On Monday, they were recording the last track and had just finished their 11th attempt. Selena wasn't feeling the excitement. Emma walked into the studio, took Gary's guitar from him, stood him up, and pointed him toward the door. "Time for a nap. 30 minutes, she said firmly. Gary had been up late the last 2 nights practicing with Selena, Julie, and Eric. Selena blinked in surprise as Emma directed everyone out of the studio. 35 minutes later, Emma brought Gary back, and they spent a quiet 15 minutes together talking as the other musicians returned one by one. Selena was the last to come in and smiled at Emma. "Thank you for that great advice," Selena said. "Sleep is important for staying healthy." "I could see everyone was tired," Emma replied. After just 2 more tries, Selena finally felt satisfied. She addressed everyone in the studio. "That's a wrap, everyone. Thank you so much for your amazing hard work. This double album is going to be fantastic." Before you leave, please talk to Janice to make sure she has your name down for the songs you worked on. Thanks again." Gary was blowing on his fingers. He had played more this weekend than he had all year. His fingers hurt. Selena walked over and gave him a hug. "Thank you for your great effort today. The songs were much better because of the feelings you helped bring out in me. It was an amazing experience. I'm not sure I'm ready to do it again soon," Gary said. She smiled at him. "Normally we wouldn't rush to finish everything in one weekend, but the stars aligned for us this time. You can't let such a chance pass." She looked at Emma. "Thank you for your help in managing everything today." Emma smiled and nodded. "It was a pleasure." Selena turned to Gary. "My agent is upstairs. You should talk to him about representing you, especially for the Burn recordings. I know Oscar is also waiting for you upstairs. He really wants to get those recordings." "Would your audio team transfer the cassettes to digital?" Gary asked. Selena smiled at him. "Not for free. Their time is pretty costly." Gary sighed and glanced at Emma. "We have something valuable here, but there are costs before we see any money, and we don't have any cash right now. Talk to Kevin, my new manager. He can give you some options." "We need to go home tonight. When does the bus leave?" Emma asked. Selena smiled at them. "The bus already left. Everyone still here is catching flights home. You'll be flying with Kevin and me tonight." Emma's eyes widened in surprise. "We've never flown before." Gary exchanged a nervous look with Emma. "I wasn't expecting to fly either." Noticing their worry, Selena realized her mistake. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you would rather take a 1-hour flight back on the jet. I didn't realize you might feel anxious about flying. I do it so often that it's become second nature." Gary nodded. "We are a bit nervous, but a 1-hour flight on a jet is much better than a 5-hour bus ride. We'll manage. Thanks." He smiled at Emma and signaled for Selena to lead them upstairs. "Let's go talk to Kevin." It was very early in the morning when Gary let them into their apartment. They carefully placed their bags and guitars down and tiredly walked into their bedroom. All they could think about was getting some rest. What they had thought would be a calm visit to Martha's Vineyard turned into a much bigger adventure than either of them had expected, and they were both worn out. "Oh, my phone has been off all day," Emma exclaimed as she plugged it in next to the bed. As soon as it connected to the network, it started buzzing. She had messages, a lot of them. "I should check." Gary nodded and got ready for bed. When he came back from the bathroom, he saw Emma staring at him with wide eyes. He looked at her with concern. "What's wrong? What is it?" "I got several messages from Nancy. She got an offer from the main company of the fitness chain. They want me to take Dennis's position running the club, and with a pay increase, it feels like hush money," Emma said anxiously. Gary was taken aback. I don't know what to say. Is this what you wanted?" Emma shook her head. "Maybe. One day. I enjoy what I do now." "Still, I can't help but admire Nancy's skills in getting this deal," Gary said with surprise, and Emma smiled again. "Yes, she's impressive," Emma agreed. Then she looked back at her phone. "I need to talk to Yvonne before I decide anything. This all started with the trouble she had." Gary nodded and walked over to hold Emma close. "That's my Emma. Follow your heart. It will always lead you right." She sighed happily in his embrace, and then kissed him gently. Pulling back with a smile, she said, Minty." "I can't say the same," Gary joked, and she gave him a playful glare, swatting his arm before heading off to brush her teeth. Gary fell onto the bed and relaxed after his long weekend adventure. He remembered how Emma managed to get everyone where they needed to be, and no one complained. That was quite an achievement with all those different personalities involved. Her smiling face filled his thoughts as sleep began to take over. When Emma returned, she smiled at the sight of Gary sleeping peacefully. She turned off the light and snuggled beside him, delighted to hear his happy sigh. This was her happy place. The next morning, Emma stood at the foot of Yvonne's bed after their weekend trip. The woman leaned back on her pillows, watching Emma with a calm look in her eyes, free from any resentment. Emma felt relieved about everything. "I know Dennis tried to make a deal, but it didn't work out. He's going to face consequences for the hit and run. Several people in the club are ready to share what they heard him confess over the loudspeaker," Emma said. Yvonne smiled. Yes, thank you for letting me know. Emma smiled back and nodded. The club made an offer to my lawyer. It's very generous. It seems like they are trying to cover things up, Emma said. Yvonne understood. Yes, they reached out to me too. They offered to pay all my medical bills. Would you? Would you consider coming back to the club as its manager? They offered me the position, but I'm not interested in running a business right now. Yvonne looked surprised and then thoughtful before nodding slowly. I might be open to that if you'd stay at the club and help me with my recovery. I've heard you have a lot of energy and can be really motivating. Emma felt a big smile spread across her face. She knew she wasn't to blame for Yvonne's problems, but the fact that Dennis caused them to hurt her friend made her uneasy. Helping Yvonne recover felt like the right way to ease that discomfort. Yvonne would regain her strength and have a fulfilling life. Emma was determined to help. As summer rolled on, good luck shined on Gary and Emma just as brightly as the sun did. Gary's new manager, Kevin, worked out a deal with Benny and Oscar, who bought Gary's full collection of Casey Burnell tapes. The upfront payment was enough to cover Gary's remaining college expenses and allowed him to send a significant amount back to his mother's, surpassing what they had given him for his first year of tuition. That felt amazing. Kevin assured him that his deal included a share of all future releases of the collection. It was just 5%, but it felt like extra money to him. Emma continued to excel at the club, and her classes became very popular. Other trainers tried to follow her example, and the club's atmosphere improved for everyone. Yvonne was managing the club from a distance as she focused on getting better. Emma assisted her daily, keeping her updated on everything that was happening and helping her with the exercises set by her therapist. Yvonne introduced new policies that made the club friendlier, less aggressive sales, better teamwork among trainers, and improved pay, all contributing to a healthier environment. They also partnered with nutrition brands to help clients adopt healthier diets. Emma was thrilled with this progress. In the middle of summer, the heat in New York City was something neither of them had ever felt before. It was hard to stay in their apartment without air conditioning during the hot days, so Gary and Emma found shady spots in nearby parks to relax. Gary often brought his acoustic guitar, and whenever he played, small groups of people would gather to listen. His nerves were getting better, but he knew he would never feel ready to perform for huge crowds. With less pressure to find new bookkeeping clients to support his courses, Gary spent more time hanging out with Emma as his current customers learned to manage on their own. They kept in touch with Selena, who mentioned that she wished she could play music in the park for passers-by like Gary did. Her popularity made that difficult. Gary found it funny when she shared how Greg packed Rockies with their fans after her performance there. The work on the double album was continuing, and Selena updated Gary and Emma on the progress. She said that Emma's photos and videos added a special touch to the project, making fans feel like they were part of the experience with all the talented artists involved. Customers who bought the album digitally on Selena's website got to enjoy all the images and videos from that weekend. Those who bought physical CDs only saw a few photos included in the booklet. There was also a special quick response code in the booklet that led to the website for more images and videos, though it didn't allow them to stream the music. Selena expressed her gratitude to Emma for capturing some truly special moments of teamwork. When fall came, Gary returned to college for his second year. Brock was no longer in the accounting program, but he dropped by sometimes to chat and joke with Gary. His new boyfriend occasionally joined them and thought Gary was fun. Lee came back and immediately dared Gary to try to beat her grades in their second year, since they were studying subjects she felt very confident about. Jasmine suggested that Lee could get some funny rewards from Gary if she succeeded. The lively and playful girl was back to give Gary a hard time again. A new student joined their study group because the others had left after struggling in their first year. Yuri Lebedev was a recent immigrant with good marks, but he still found the language challenging. Gary really enjoyed his Russian accent. The second-year course was a bit tougher, but Gary was doing great, much to Lee's annoyance. Today, they had a quiz in their last class, so the study group stayed in the cafeteria to go over the material. However, one member was late and didn't show up until an hour later. Gary felt a gentle hug from behind. "You can't just take my notes, Jasmine. You need to figure out the equations by yourself or you won't learn them," he said lightly. Pouting, Jasmine sat down on the bench next to him and rested her head on his shoulder. Yuri, sitting across from them, looked surprised at Jasmine's closeness. It seemed he hadn't spent much time with girls. Gary smiled down at Jasmine's bright eyes. "Why are you looking at my boyfriend?" said a voice behind them. Jasmine sat up and turned to see Emma smiling. "It's no use. Gary is hard to sway and is disappointingly loyal to you," she said jokingly. "Of course I am. I've loved Emma for a long time, even when I didn't realize it," he replied sincerely. Emma leaned in for a kiss, and Jasmine rolled her eyes at their sweet moment. She stood up, waved her hands in a playful manner, and walked away. The couple didn't notice her thoughtful look as she left. After finishing their kiss, Emma smiled at Gary. "Ready to go?" Gary blinked at her, unsure. Emma sighed dramatically at his forgetfulness, then he grinned. "I was just joking. I'm ready." He packed up his books, put on his jacket, said his goodbyes, and they left together. They quickly stopped at home to drop off his books and change into nicer clothes. They were going out for a fun night. They made their way to Uptown Manhattan and a fancy nightclub to meet Selena for the release party of the new tribute album. Many of the artists from the album were there, along with some important people in the music industry and select press members. When they arrived, Selena welcomed them with enthusiasm and confidence. "It's not too late for you to join the tour," she said quietly to Gary and Emma while holding them close. Gary knew she felt let down, but he had been clear about his decision. He also knew she had hired a new lead guitarist for the band, and he was involved in choosing her. The new musician was young, talented, and passionate about music. "Michaela is really good. You'll have a great time on the tour," Gary encouraged. Selena looked at him for a moment and then nodded. "It will be fantastic," she said with certainty. Then she took Gary's hand again. "When I return, I want to start making a new album based on the new song we created for the tribute album. Will you work on that with me?" Emma's smile showed Gary she was in, so he smiled back. "Of course. Just have your team talk to mine. Wait, your team is my team." Kevin, who was nearby, caught this as Gary included him in the conversation. "What's this? More teamwork with my favorite two clients?" Kevin joked, and Selena's happy smile confirmed it. "Gary, let me gather the details from her and I'll reach out to you," Kevin said as he led Selena away. The talented woman Gary mentioned joined him and Emma, and they shook hands. "Great to see you again, Gary, Emma," Michaela said in her lovely Irish accent. She had big, bright red hair and rosy cheeks. Her lively green eyes sparkled with joy being around her favorite stars. "Good to see you too," Gary replied. "I can't believe I'm going on a tour with Selena. I'm so excited," Michaela exclaimed. "Better you up on stage than me," Gary said with a slight shiver. The guitarist looked at him with concern. "Still dealing with stage fright?" Gary shrugged. "Luckily, accountants don't perform before a crowd," he said with a grin. Michaela laughed and exchanged a smile with Emma. "I loved the pictures and videos you took of all the musicians." Emma beamed with pride. They moved deeper into the party, greeting the artists they had worked with and introducing Michaela to them. Benny and Oscar welcomed Gary and Emma with enthusiasm. The conversion of cassettes to digital format was almost done. They were excited about releasing the first album next year and talked about releasing it on vinyl first for more chances to earn royalties. Dinner was served, and people found tables to sit together. Michaela stuck close to Gary and Emma all evening. Several musicians Gary collaborated with on the album stopped by to say hello. Some even asked if Gary would be open to jamming with them sometime. Gary was taken aback, but Emma was thrilled and noted the dates for their meetups. As the evening came to a close, Gary and Emma settled onto a sofa with Michaela, Gary between the two redheads. Across from them sat Selena, Eric, and Julie. Benny and Oscar rounded out their group. Michaela seemed to be trying to work up the courage to ask Gary something, and he sensed it had been on her mind all night. Finally, he looked into her bright green eyes. "Would you like to ask me something?" She giggled, clearly caught, and nodded. "I'd like to know what inspires you to reach deep emotions in your music," she said. Gary saw Selena's eyes light up as Michaela leaned in to hear his answer. Gary smiled and nodded gently. "That's an easy one. It has changed in small ways over the years as we grew up, but now I see how important it really is." He noticed everyone was listening closely. "I picture a distant farmhouse at dawn on a warm, sunny morning. A dirt path leads away from me toward the house. Coming down the path is a creature so beautiful and graceful. All I can do is open my heart to her, hoping I'm deserving of her love and wishing she will always be with me." Emma looked at Gary with tears in her eyes, remembering their last day in high school. He was late, and she ran to meet him. Her love for him felt so strong that she pulled him into a tight hug and kissed him. Selena smiled widely at the scene of the couple's affection for each other. Once Emma steadied her emotions, she gave a bright but shy smile to the others. "I'll say it again, Gary, you're one lucky guy," Eric said with a grin. Gary nodded, unable to speak because of the lump in his throat. Julie sighed, looking a bit dreamy. "Do you think a loud drummer like me will ever find true love?" Selena smiled back and nodded. "I thought I had that with Greg, but he lost his way, caught up in jealousy and guilt. But seeing Gary and Emma, I can't help but believe in love, and the chance for love still exists for me," Selena said with a gentle smile. Gary and Emma nodded back, and her smile became brighter. She raised her glass, and everyone at the table joined in for a toast. Selena beamed at her friends. "Here's to a future filled with successful ventures, laughter in our days, comfort in our nights, deeper friendships, and most of all, love to fill our hearts." Gary couldn't think of anything to add, and saw the love Emma had for him reflected in her eyes. With her love, he felt he could do anything. Hey everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.